She barely glanced in my direction as she entered the kitchen. Even a simple hello or at least a familiar smile would be appropriate. But she just smoothed her dress, looked nervously over her shoulder, and said, "Remember, I'm going out with the girls today. I have my phone with me if something happens, but only call if absolutely necessary." I glanced at her before answering. I wondered how she could expect me to believe that this tight little black dress was for girls, or makeup, or perfume. Did she think that girls like to see girls, so to speak, uplifted and exposed the way they were now? I should have been offended that she thought I was so stupid. I should have been angry that she attributed such ignorance to me. But no, because I knew I deserved it. In the end, she managed to hide her affair from me for much longer than she should have. I was the worst kind of fool, the one who trusts, to those who let others into their lives, those who bet their lives on others. I made a mistake, realized the mistake, and now I corrected the mistake. "Before you go," I finally said, "I need you to sit down for a minute and talk to me." She didn't even turn around, just gave an irritated grunt as she rummaged through her purse and said, "Sorry, honey, but I really have to go. I'm already late." I suppressed my anger with difficulty, clutching the beer bottle tighter, but I felt nothing. No anger, no rage, no resentment. This indifferent neglect has become all too typical of her lately. She rejected me. She rejected children. She rejected herself. And now, we're all used to it. But not anymore. It was time to act. I threw the keys she was looking for on the table. "I understand your impatience," I muttered. "Believe me, I know like no one else. But if you spend the evening with Carl Jensen again without talking to me, then you better never come back here." She froze, stood there with her hand in her purse, without saying a word. "What?" she finally whispered, her voice quiet and full of bewilderment. "What did you say?" "This will only take a minute," I said. "Sit down at the table and let's talk." She lingered for another moment without turning or responding to my offer. She held her purse as if it could save her. But it won't save you. Finally, her shoulders went limp, her arms dropped, and she turned to me. There was a sense of guilt in her gaze, but not in her eyes. They rushed about like a hunted animal, wounded and without hope. She sat down heavily on the chair opposite me. There were many quick glances in her direction, many silent searches for an answer, but not a single glance met mine. "John," she finally said, I'm so sorry." Her voice was almost a whisper. God, was she hoping to get away with this apology? How lazy do you need to be? "Sorry for what?" I asked with apparent surprise. "I can't wait to hear what you did to think that I'm sorry would fix everything." She bit her lip, looked down at the table, and ran her finger along the pattern on the wooden surface. "I don't think this will fix everything. I know what a mess I made, even if you don't believe it. But be that as it may, I am sorry for the betrayal." That's it. I smiled. Be generous, be calm. The first step is already behind us. "Thank you for not lying to my face," I said honestly. "It wouldn't matter, though. No lie could save you from the truth of what I know. But it makes me think that maybe I did the right thing by deciding not to leave." She played a little. "Are you not leaving?" I don't want you to leave," she whispered. "I don't love him, John. Honestly, I raised my hand to silence her. Seeing the raised hand, she bit her lip and fell silent. Temptation began to grow in my chest. "Don't hit her, no matter what you do. It would be so easy, so instant. But once you start, you won't be able to stop." "I know you don't love me," I contorted my face to show how little these words of hers meant to me. "Or at least you think you don't love. In any case, I have already heard all your explanations." "Heard?" she frowned. "What do you mean?" "Well, you're stupid. No, so far everything was going according to plan. Ignore this tension in your stomach. Remember what this is all for. You're doing everything right. Don't ruin it now." "It's simple," I shrugged. "I heard them when you said them to him." If possible, she became even paler and seemed to shrink even more in her chair. Did you hear us? I just looked at her without changing my facial expression, and she looked away. There were tears in her eyes. Sparkling would probably be the right word. She took a deep breath. What are you going to do? I know that right now it probably seems to you that I don't love you, but I really do. And I don't want to lose what we have. I'll die if you leave. I nodded. I know. Like I said, I heard you explain it to him. I don't need repetition. I could kill you, you know. At any one of 1,000 moments, I could reach out and complete your story. But he didn't. Think about it. About what it means. I leaned over and picked up the heavy envelope. Carefully observing her reaction, I placed it on the table. The envelope was overfilled, about to burst. I ran my palm over its surface and lightly patted it for emphasis. This envelope contains everything I know about your betrayal. She sucked in a loud breath and looked at its thickness again, her eyes widening. I let her realize the meaning of this silent, cold warning. You can look at it later. I'm not going to hide anything from you, and I'll try to explain everything as honestly and openly as possible. I stopped to rub my eyes with my thumb and forefinger. Fine. Take a deep breath. You've already prepared everything. Now it's time for the hard part. She looked at the envelope as if it were a living cobra. He's so fat, she whispered. I nodded and patted it again, enjoying the sound my hand made when it hit the massive stack of paper. Once I got my suspicions and started checking you out, it was amazingly easy to gather all the information. You really weren't trying to hide it anymore, were you? I thought you trusted me. I thought it would protect me. I trusted, and it protected you. This will never happen again. She nodded quickly. It won't be necessary. I'm sorry, John. Please give me a chance to fix this. If you agree to stay, I already told you, I muttered. I'll stay, and I won't try to uselessly kick you out. I understand perfectly well what this will lead to. No, if one of us files for divorce, you will have to do it. I ignored the surprised expression on her face, choosing my words and trying to separate the meaning of what was said and reality. The truth was that it took me 1 hour of consultation with a lawyer, 1 day of internet research, and weeks of subsequent reflection to understand my feelings, what I had left to protect in this life, and what I needed to do to survive. Tonight is just the first phase. I swallowed and continued. However, my decision to stay is subject to one condition. I spoke in my businesslike tone, direct, abrupt, decisive. I've thought about this a lot, and while it's obvious to me that you probably do have some kind of affection for me, I can't throw away the affection I have for you just because it became inconvenient. A possibility for us, being a couple, doesn't exist anymore. She frowned and opened her mouth to answer, but I raised my hand. Your actions, both in relation to this novel and in the way you behave in it, make it clear to me that I am not capable of giving you what my former friend is now giving you. You said it yourself. You told him that you have the best of both worlds. With me, you have love, care, and family. With him is a person who turns you inside out, if I remember your words correctly. I grimaced. With both, you get attention and care. Well, congratulations. She winced as she heard her own words. I'm sorry I said that, but this is not true. It was just. She trailed off, perhaps realizing that it would be impossible to convince me of what she said or running her mind over other things I must have heard. Forgive me for everything, she admitted after a minute of silence. But I don't understand what you're telling me. Another deep breath. It all turned out to be less insensitive than I had hoped. I don't think anything is really like that. Listen, I continued, we live by understanding three basic realities. Firstly, you and I have a certain affection for each other, whether we want to have it or not, and whether this attachment is of the same kind on both sides, it does not matter. We have love in one form or another. We have family history, perhaps even the future. At this, she perked up slightly. But the other two realities are that you have a lover, and I no longer have any sexual feelings for you at all. And to no one, you got rid of them very effectively, but I will never admit it. Not for you. not for anyone else. However, this is no longer your business. Any trace of joy on her face from my previous words disappeared. John, she began. I admit that I don't want to lose you if I can avoid it, I continued, following my pre-prepared plan. But I don't want you to be unhappy, and I certainly don't want you to try to restore a physical connection that I am no longer capable of or do not want to maintain. For both of us, there is only pain along this road. Therefore, I squared my shoulders and prepared for the worst. My decision to stay in this marriage, my decision to stay in this relationship, depends on you continuing your affair on the side. She started to say something, suddenly froze, and opened her eyes wide, realizing what I said. It's not funny, John. Okay, I grumbled, because I've never been more serious in my life. I would ask that if your feelings towards him or me begin to change in any way, that you would come and talk to me so that we can protect the children from the worst consequences of our divorce. Besides that, you can mind your own business and I can mind mine. This may, in fact, be the case. If you want, you can see him more often. You wanted this yourself, didn't you? So can you be together more? We almost died, both of us, that night when I heard it. You didn't even know how close you were to this. I barely made it up the stairs after listening to the recording and looking at the photos. This was the first and last confirmation of what had previously been only a dark suspicion. I was furious. I was destroyed. I thought I was already dead. And you lay there, sleeping so peacefully, so content, so happy with how your life turned out. I felt bad. I stood over you, mentally plotting our final chapter with clinical precision, and suddenly you rolled over and woke up. You narrowed your eyes and looked at me. I saw concern in you, a real worry. Then you touched my hand, so tenderly, and asked if I was okay. You sat up as you said this, all your contentment disappeared, and it seemed like you really cared about me. I shook my head, pushing away this memory. She frowned, contemplating my words, or perhaps trying to figure out what I wasn't saying. John, she said, some of the things I said when we were together. Don't, I warned her. Just don't. Stupid woman. The best thing you did was honesty. You must understand this. So why would you give it up now? Besides, I couldn't stand the pity in your eyes if you started lying to me, even now, after everything. I need you to keep me informed of where you are and what your plans are, but I don't want any details and I don't want to talk about that very thing. The only reason I need to know when you're with him is because it'll be safer for all of us. She wrinkled her nose. I am not going to date him, John. You really aren't serious about all this. Her gaze quickly slid over my face. You say, in all seriousness, it's like a heart attack, like a man's hand on a woman's throat. It's not the best situation, but the best option no longer exists, so I chose this one. You can accept it now as it is, or we can start talking about divorce. But if you don't want the marriage to end and all your relatives to know what you've been doing, this is the only way out. I'm scared. Everything you do. It just doesn't fit in my head. I smiled bitterly. Then I guess you're starting to understand how I've been feeling these past few weeks. But why don't you want me to stop? I want this. Perhaps the only thing I want more is to never touch you again and to be near our children. But I understood what she meant. You're the cheater here, Karen, not me. There's no catch here. I'm not playing some kind of game with you. I'm not plotting. I'm not arranging complex schemes. Honestly, I just don't have the strength for this anymore. I looked pointedly at my watch. Now, honey, you better hurry up, or he'll start to worry. She shuddered again, and I realized that she was suddenly acutely aware of how obviously she had dressed up today. Oh, you feel like a fool, don't you? Great. Welcome to the club. John, she pleaded, can I just stay home? At least today? I don't feel. Absolutely not, I snapped, a little louder than I had intended, causing her to immediately shrink. To be honest, I don't care what you do with him. You can discuss what a monster I am, or that this is a pathetic and weak decision, or have sex until you pass out. To me, don't care. Sit down, watch a movie, and eat ice cream if you want. But you have a date today, and you won't miss it. At some point, I am entitled to a moment of sincere, inconsolable self-pity, and you can't be here for that. No way. I don't. She was amazed at my persistence. Are you really serious about saying this? Absolutely. And you are not going to divorce me. Do you still love me? I will not file for divorce. I will not leave you. Unfortunately, I still love you. She studied me for a moment, then looked down at the table and nodded slightly. I won't pretend to understand everything, she admitted slowly, but I guess I'd be a fool not to accept your terms, right? I think most people would think so. She stood up slowly, and her feminine figure stood out especially in this dress. I turned away. I've never really liked staring at other people's women. During the 3 months of her affair, Karen got into shape. Like most women, she retained her feminine curves, but during college, she developed a softness around her waist that never went away. Now she was gone, and I had never seen her look so fit and attractive. She also changed her hairstyle to a style that was playful and seductive at the same time, in a kind of mischievous style. She spent a small fortune on new clothes and even traded in her old minivan for a sleek white SUV. Essentially, she became someone else. Obviously, Carl became the impetus for her to try a completely different life. Maybe that's what he gave her, after all, a chance to stop being a wife and mother for a while. I didn't really care. But I knew that it was all these changes that gave her away. More precisely, the last clue was the SUV that she so carefully cherished. You see, she wanted this car because it was a mirror copy of her lover's car. She and Carl thought it was cute to be on the same level. I've never sat in her new SUV, ran my fingers through her sexy new hairstyle, or had the good fortune to see her renewed, slender body. In some ways, I was even grateful for it. This created a distance, separating me from the new woman with whom I had almost nothing in common, the woman who used to be my wife. She bit her lip. What time should I get home? She asked timidly. Well, I thought, you used to get back from bachelorette parties at about 10, but mostly to keep up the lie, didn't you? She lowered her eyes and nodded. Then come back when you're ready. At that moment, something in my voice betrayed me. I couldn't quite hold back the sadness I'd been hiding so carefully over the last few weeks, and I saw a flicker of guilt flash across her face. She shifted from foot to foot. Really, John, I don't have to go. Actually, I don't want this. You will go. I don't need your pity, trash. What will you do while I'm gone? What, are you hoping that I will do something to myself, or will I find a way to escape? Should I drop everything and call it a day? Don't flatter yourself. Oh, I looked around the room. If the girls are free, maybe we'll go out to eat and get a movie. Otherwise, I learned long ago to find something to do while you have fun. She nodded sadly and looked at me as if she was afraid she would never see me again. It's okay, I said. Just go. And if you come back after midnight, send me a message so I don't worry. She nodded, walked over, and leaned down to kiss me. I turned away, offering my cheek, which she obediently kissed. Then she straightened up, straightened her outfit, and smiled tightly. I'm almost like a teenager going on a date that his dad isn't happy about. Damn you. Just remember to send a message. And tell your Carl that he needs to think very, very hard about his future. She rolled her eyes in an exaggerated manner, trying to lighten the mood. Even though she seemed to realize it wasn't working, she continued anyway. Don't worry, Daddy, she turned. I didn't laugh. She didn't seem to notice. When she left, I put my head in my hands and just focused on my breathing for a long, long time. There was a kind of grim relief, the kind you get after you wake up from a major operation that was both life-threatening and left a permanent, disfiguring scar. It wasn't easy, but it's all over now. I understood that there would still be equally difficult, if not more difficult, moments ahead, but I allowed myself a small victory, knowing that at least this moment was left behind. When I was ready, I got up, washed up in the kitchen, and went to see if the girls wanted to eat pizza. Thank all the gods, they wanted to. On Saturday morning, Karen got up earlier than usual. I wasn't particularly surprised. Usually, after her bachelorette parties, she would return around 10 and have a glass of wine in the jacuzzi before getting into bed. This was a relatively new habit, which I initially perceived as her unspoken request for more personal time at the end of the day. Now I saw it completely differently, in a much darker light. The jacuzzi really seemed like the best way to enjoy the relaxed afterglow of a night of uninhibited sex. Plus, it helped wash everything off before bed. But this time she returned a little after 9:30, took a quick shower, and, barely able to stand, fell into bed. She looked tired, tense, and even somewhat ashamed of herself. Nevertheless, even in this strange change, I could not resist studying her clothes, her hair, even the very manner in which she entered the house. My eyes searched for evidence that I did not want to see and that I did not need. This became my new habit, a terrible match for her own. It manifested itself through small, almost unconscious questions, which at times made me feel like I was drowning in a drop of water. Was there a slight wrinkle on the front of the fabric of her clothes? Is that stray hair behind her right ear just a stray curl, or was she trying to tidy herself up before going home? Is she limping slightly? The desire to see the indiscernible was all-consuming. It was also unwanted, and it made me sick to realize that I couldn't control this impulse one iota. I didn't need answers to these questions, of course. I didn't even want to know what the questions themselves were. But try to stop and see how it works out for you. The next morning, Saturday, she came into the kitchen in a robe and slippers, with a face expressing a mixture of fatigue and some kind of determination. She started the conversation as soon as she picked up breakfast, as if she had thought everything through in advance. "You caught me off guard yesterday," she croaked, giving me a reproachful look and plopping her food onto the table with an annoying thud. "If you had given me just a little time to think, just a minute, I would have refused. I would have stayed home, despite your stupid threats, and we would have talked. We talked like adults." She shook her head, and this gesture looked quite impressive. "You understand this, right?" "Of course I understand, stupid. But why did you think that I would ever want to talk to you about anything again? I considered the possibility that you might do just that, that you might miss the chance to save yourself in a fit of selfish stubbornness. I haven't taken my eyes off the newspaper yet. That's why I didn't give you time to think. I did you a favor." I felt her irritated look, and I even liked it. "Damn it, John," she shouted, waving her arms. "Look at me. For God's sake, put down the newspaper and look at me for a minute." I calmly put the newspaper down and looked at her. "I don't want our marriage to be like this," she said, breaking down more and more into screaming. "I don't want to live separately from you, but for you to tell me how to spend my time. And," she leaned in, lowering her voice, "most of all, I don't want to keep doing this to you. I can't keep doing this. This is wrong." This was really interesting. "Do this to me?" I grinned. "Oh, I think you got it all wrong, Karen. This is not what you do to me. Not now. This is what you have already done. This is a fait accompli." The bullet left the barrel, flew through the air, and pierced deep into meat and bone. I leaned towards her. "This cannot be undone. Understand? Does it get to you? There is no need for us to discuss this again, because nothing that is said can change what has been done. You, my dear wife, betrayed me. You lied and cheated. Our family, our life. It will forever be part of your story, our story, part of who you are. And although this was not what I wanted, you made this decision without my participation. So now that you don't like living with the consequences, you can't just magically undo it just because your little escapade backfires on your future. Stop it, John. Just stop it." Tears appeared in her eyes. "It seems real. Doesn't our marriage mean anything to you? Don't you care at all? It's not fair that. Don't talk to me about honesty." My fist slammed down on the table, spilling the glass of juice that ran across the floor. I didn't even notice that I was moving. Crap. Closing my eyes, I took a deep breath and imagined cool mountain streams. Then, having regained some composure, I continued, "If you look at everything that is happening objectively, If you actually step back and think about possible alternatives, then you will begin to understand where your current doubts come from. This is not love, hope, or concern for marriage. It's guilt and fear. Understand, these feelings are not the result of rational thinking. They are not born of some desire, and they certainly do not indicate what you really want. I took a sip of coffee. Now everything is as it should be, and this is the only way that works for me. So, while I appreciate your concern, you don't have to worry anymore. Not about me, not about anything else. It won't do anyone any good. You haven't loved me for a long time, so why change anything now? I bent down and wiped up the spilled juice. I told the truth last night, Karen. I don't have any sexual feelings for you right now, and I'm not sure it won't become a permanent condition. The thought of touching you makes me sick, so in that regard, we're done. Besides, I'm not even sure I could be that close to you and stop myself from grabbing you by the throat. I don't want to test this. But I was also honest, saying I love you and I'm not going to leave. Obviously, my feelings could change, just like your feelings for me. But right now, the only reason I could leave is if you start flaunting your affair, humiliate me publicly, start showing signs of falling in love, or if you break up relationship with him and try to force me to be with you, which I don't want. John, I want you to be happy, I stated firmly. Can't we both accept that this is the only way, perhaps the best way, for this to happen? No, I'm afraid so. She swallowed. I don't want to believe it. I don't care what you want to believe. I raised my hands, exhaled, and changed tactics. Do you realize, Karen, how happy you have been these last few months? Silence. Oh yes, I waved my hand. You smile, relax, laugh at bad jokes, and listen to the girls talk about their affairs. You were more cheerful and attentive than I've ever seen you. I hardly lied. When she felt guilty about how much fun she was having away from us, she suddenly began to show unusual care and attention. Maybe if she realizes this as her way out, it will always be true. It would be useful for the girls, and she would leave me alone. Come on, do something for someone else, Karen, at least once in my life. John, she muttered, I didn't realize. Of course you didn't notice. Why would you even notice? You were focused on something else. She lowered her head. I wasn't trying to throw it in your face, you know. I swear I didn't try. It's just, when I was with him, I missed you. All of you, in fact. My family. Then I realized. She covered her mouth with her hand and tried not to cry. I know. I took a bite of food. But then, that was 3 weeks ago. When did his mother get sick? He flew to her, and you couldn't see each other for 4 or 5 days. I shook my head and smiled mirthlessly. You really have turned into a monster, haven't you? I haven't seen you this angry since your second pregnancy, when everything you could hurt was constantly. I paused and began to pick at my food with a fork, but he never took a bite. And honestly, I've never seen you so rude. Never. The children and I took on all your rage because you were deprived of what we could not give you. How is that fair? Now she was crying a lot. I didn't mean to. Great. Break her down and then help her see the way back. And don't give her any chance to rethink her options. The point is that overall you were happier than I can ever remember, and that affected the way you acted at home. This affected me and the children too. Your happiness has made life a little easier for all of us. So why would we want it to go away? I want to be happy with you, she sobbed. But we don't choose, right, dear? You are happy with me. It's just what you do with it that keeps it going. I'm scared, she wiped her nose with the sleeve of her robe. I'm scared that you'll leave me. You know I won't do that. She shook her head. But why aren't you scared? If it were the other way around. If you did this to me, I would. I would. God. I decided she deserved a little honesty, at least on this one issue. She has been so patient and accepted all my little lies until now. One truth could be allowed. I'm scared, Karen. In fact, I'm terribly scared. Do you want to know why? She nodded. I'm scared because it turned out that I was completely alone. Can you imagine what it's like? No, of course not. I put down my fork. For a long time, it seemed to me that everything was fine with me. I was in a privileged position, you know, the winner. I looked away. Now I understand that I have very little left, and I'm afraid that I won't be able to preserve and protect it. And you are not on this list. But perhaps she already knew this, because she ran out of the room crying. I simply stood up, completing another mission, and put the dishes in the sink. Then I went out to work on the lawn. When I returned a few hours later, wiping the sweat from my face with my sleeve and looking forward to a cool shower, the contents of the envelope were scattered across our bed. I've been waiting for this moment for a long time. I even left it in a visible place, knowing that her curiosity would eventually lead her to find out how complete I was about her affair. Transcripts of conversations, photographs, discs with video recordings. Everything was in plain sight. Now she knew everything. She was in the bathroom. The shower was on. The girls went to a friend's house, so there was no need to worry that they would find all this incriminating content laid out on the bed. I went to make myself some more coffee, leaving everything as it was. Finally, she emerged 25 minutes later wearing sweatpants, a t-shirt, and a guilty, unsure look in her eyes, something that had been rare and refreshingly new for her lately. Since she began to cheat on our marriage, she has developed a self-confidence that in other circumstances might have commanded respect, but in fact only disgusted me, knowing its source. Sometimes this confidence even turned into arrogance, and then it became unbearable to be around her. However, not for the first time recently, I noticed how good she looked. I noted this with the detachment with which a person might look at an exhibit in a museum. I saw amazing beauty but felt nothing. It had no meaning to me except that I knew it was there. Damn, she's lost 10 years in recent months. These years, gained thanks to her betrayal, were mercilessly stolen from my own face. I'm not so blind that I can't see how much I've aged during this time. I just couldn't bring myself to care about it anymore. Hi, she said quietly, looking miserable and avoiding looking at me. Her eyes were red, and she ran her finger underneath them as she walked into the room. You looked at the report, I remarked, handing her a cup of coffee and inviting her to sit down. She nodded. I didn't think that. I mean, I know you said you knew everything, but... She blew on the coffee. If it helps you, it was knowing everything that made me stay. If I only had some murky pictures of you, sleeping with him, I might have acted differently, and it would only make things worse for us, by the way. Knowing everything helped me see that you are still involved with us, even if your return is less and less compared to other investors. Well, it sure didn't make me feel like a good person looking at all this. She took a sip of coffee, and it was even harder to realize that everything I saw and heard, you saw and heard too, to understand that you know everything that we did together that I told him. She looked at me. You even knew about the car. I nodded. She shook her head in surprise. And you didn't even try to stop me. You let me trade in our family minivan with all its memories, and you knew exactly why I wanted that particular car. Oh no, you can't put this on me. I didn't know then. In fact, the fact that you wanted this car, was what made me ask questions. Do you think I didn't notice that it's exactly like Carl's? You should have seen your face when you saw her in the parking lot. I clenched my jaw, like a child, for Christmas. She winced. Like a child. That seems like a good description of me lately. No, happy. Happy is how I can describe you lately. And maybe that's the only thing that matters. Everything else. I waved my hand. She looked at me skeptically. You can't seriously expect me to believe you're not dying inside, John. Damn it, it's written all over your face. It's weird, Karen, because you didn't notice it before. Is it true? So I'm suffering, I shrugged. Would it make me feel better if I left? Or if you left? What if you stopped dating him and stopped being happy and we tried to breathe life into our relationship again? With you, who doesn't need it, and with me, who can't anymore? I shook my head. I have a wife who I love and two wonderful daughters who mean everything to me. Now they are happier than ever. I can endure pain if it is the price for their happiness. You will never take my children away from me. I promise this. I will do whatever it takes to keep them with me. I don't like being the cause of your pain. How touching. You do a lot of things, Kay, and only one of them hurts me. A pain that is stronger than anything I have experienced in my life. Pain that becomes more unbearable every second. I smiled. Don't make it into something more than it is. Sometimes I wish you had just killed me. Isn't this pathetic? Sometimes I allow myself to become so sad that I almost wish I was dead. She didn't calm down at all. I just don't understand. How can you live like this? Are you kidding? I already live like this, Karen. A long time ago, by the way. But how can you leave everything as it is? Don't you want to fight for more? I leaned forward with obvious impatience. The value of this conversation for my plans was rapidly declining, and I needed to end it. Do you still love me? I asked quietly. Certainly, she exclaimed predictably. That's it. I shrugged. That's enough. Okay? She stood up abruptly and came up to me, hugged me, pressed herself to my chest, hiding her face. I held her there, letting her son on my shoulder, fighting the urge to push her away and throw her on the floor. And then I took a step back and gave her a chance to calm down. What should we do now? She asked with sorrow in her voice. Continue to do what we have been doing so far. That's it. It feels like the whole world has turned upside down. Well, let it be upside down. As long as we are within gravity, we still don't care. Perhaps. She looked at me. What? What should we do today? Today? What are we doing today? That is. She shifted from foot to foot. Did you have plans? I winced. There was something in her hesitation that conveyed far more to me than she intended. Well, I said carefully, choosing my words. I have a new book. I just want to spend the day at home relaxing and reading. She looked pleased. You didn't want to. I don't know, maybe go out somewhere, do something special. Disgusting. If you're going to ask permission, at least do it with dignity and not like a coward. Yes, I lied, looking straight into his eyes. A quiet day with a book. Sounds just perfect. Then I turned to the window and added casually, although it took all my strength. The kids won't be back until dinner, so a quiet day is just fine. I heard her move. She touched my hand. Tell me you'll be here when I get back. You know I will. That doesn't mean I don't want to hear it, she whispered. I didn't answer, continuing to look out the window at the quiet, orderly world. After a few moments, curiosity got the better of me, and I turned around in silence. She was no longer there. Well, God bless. She came out of the bedroom a few minutes later in sports leggings and a top, with a travel bag in her hands. When she noticed me looking at the bag, she picked it up and said, When I realized that you knew everything, it seemed stupid to hide it in the car. I shrugged. I had known for a long time about her bag for meetings on the side, and about everything that was in it. For a moment, we just looked at each other. Me sitting in a chair with a book I had no intention of reading, and she holding her bag and feeling an emotion that made me feel sick. She seemed a little awkward and didn't know what to do next. But then she smiled and, with a timid attempt, repeated the stupid joke she had said the day before. I won't stay out late, Daddy. She brushed a strand of hair from her face. Such a simple gesture. Such amazing beauty. I looked away. That Friday, the Baileys hosted one of their frequent neighborhood parties. The word neighbors, of course, is relative families gathered from all over the area covered by the nearby elementary school. You understand how this happens. It's clear that all this did not start on the initiative of husbands or children, but nevertheless, we always had a good time. We always went to these parties, but this one was different. I knew Carl would be there. He didn't quite fit in with the couple-dominated crowd, but he was Tom Bailey's bosom buddy and never missed a chance to get to a party if it was in his power. Now I thought that perhaps he was using these parties to hit on the wives of his married friends. From the moment I found out about their affair, I tried to avoid him, but I also realized that being around other people would be nice for a change, and that the kids would have fun here too. Therefore, although the temptation was great to declare illness or come up with some kind of emergency situation so as not to see this bastard, I decided not to give up and go. Besides, I didn't want him to think he could scare me off so easily. In a sense, coming to this party was a matter of principle for me. Karen was clearly excited. Whether she saw this as an opportunity for us to get closer, a way to convince herself that she really could have it all, or just a chance to spend some time with her lover, I didn't know, and maybe I didn't really care anymore. However, when we first arrived, she stayed unusually close to me, and it seemed to me that in this way she was trying to give a sign to someone, perhaps me or someone else. I repeatedly gave her questioning glances, but she ignored them. Great, let's play innocent. But the way she always tried to hold my hand or look at me left no doubt about her intentions. The Baileys always made sure there was plenty of alcohol at their parties, and as the evening wore on, nerves and excitement seemed to get the better of Karen. She drank more than usual and faster than she should have, and it became noticeable. She was becoming more relaxed, playful, and seemed less anxious than when we first arrived. By the time the sun began to sink towards the horizon, she had already staggered, left me, and went to communicate with others. As soon as this happened, she seemed to stop paying attention to me completely. So the hypothesis about restoring communication is over. Not long after, I noticed that she and Carl found themselves in the same company again and again. Not very often, but enough to be noticeable. And my experience told me that it looked like an accident, which in fact it was not. They didn't do anything to alert the others, but already knowing the truth, it was hard not to notice the way their eyes lit up when they looked at each other, or the way Karen laughed too loudly at Carl's jokes, especially when she thought that no one looks. The evening continued, and the alcohol continued to flow. Several times, when conversations became especially lively or everyone was laughing together, Carl put his hand on Karen's shoulder, or she touched his chest. This was not enough to declassify them, but it hurt and caused an unbearable feeling of heat inside me. Jesus Christ, I thought, is she making fun of me? How can she do this right in front of everyone? What was she thinking? Does she even care about anything? To someone? For some reason, I was confident that I could hide the depth of my pain from her and count on her reacting to it as a human being. I thought she was human enough to intuitively grasp at least an ounce of truth. Obviously, I was wrong. I watched as the group they were standing with gradually dispersed, leaving them alone. They started talking quietly, Carl leaning in a little closer than he should have, and Karen giggling softly and playfully. And then Karen did something that shook me to the core. She looked around at the crowd with an expression of arrogant amusement and laughed. And that's when I finally realized what they were really doing. They played a damn game with us. Apparently, they had talked about it beforehand. Probably before I talked to her about it, although that didn't stop her for some reason. I could almost hear them agreeing. Let's pretend to be a couple in front of everyone, but without anyone noticing what we're doing. That's why Karen was so careful to be near me, to hold my hand at the beginning of the evening. It was a signal to her partner in crime that it was not time to start the game, and a way to lull my guard so that I would not notice her antics later. Being around me was just preparation for the game. I leaned on the railing, suddenly feeling very tired. My wife used me as a prop to play romantic games with her lover in front of our closest friends. She also used our friends as puppets. Our friends. We were all just toys to them, people who could be deceived for their own pleasure. I looked around the party. These were people who had been kind to us for so many years. Much better than Carl, I realized. Why would anyone even do this to them? Had Karen really changed so much in the past 6 months that she considered this behavior acceptable? Where have its principles gone? Ha! What a stupid question in this situation. I turned back to where Karen and Carl had just stood, but they were no longer there. Frowning, I scanned the crowd, trying to find them. Not finding them, I began to walk around the yard, expecting that I would bump into them in some other company. But they were nowhere to be found. I walked around the entire backyard twice before entering the house, citing the need to use the restroom. They weren't there either. And then, passing by the living room on the way back to the street, I saw them. Through the large window, behind the decorative bushes on Bailey's lawn, I saw their silhouettes. Karen pressed herself against the tree, and Carl rested his hand on the trunk above her head, leaning towards her. They talked, or rather, he said something, and she looked at him with obvious admiration. Then his expression changed. A seductive look flashed in his eyes, and he leaned even closer. Before my eyes, they kissed tenderly. A long and intimate kiss. They kissed with such tenderness, such intimacy that it was unbearable. As soon as he pulled away a little, she grabbed him by the neck and pulled him back for an even more passionate, deep kiss. Their tongues intertwined as Carl gently ran his thumb across her cheek. Finally, they separated. She said something to him, and he nodded. Despite everything I had already seen and heard, the words they whispered to each other, the passion with which they indulged in each other, nothing hurt me as much as this. It was so tender and truly touching. When they talk about lovers becoming one, they don't mean sex, but the very connection that I just saw. I was turned inside out. I ran to the bathroom and could hardly stop myself from vomiting. I was filled with unbearable feelings. How did they still manage to hurt me so much after everything that had happened? After everything I've already seen and heard? The obvious answer was that on some level, I still loved Karen, no matter what. This love was once a blessing. Now it has become an endless torture, imposed on me for some sins unknown to me. But even this could not fully explain such a strong reaction. This kiss hit me in the same way as if I had not suspected anything. It was as if I had rediscovered betrayal. It's like I lost her again. I couldn't understand. I vomited again. There was a knock on the door, and I heard Tom Bailey's concerned voice. "Are you okay there?" I winced. "Wonderful. It's just that I missed the care of my friends." "It's okay," I lied. "I will be out soon." Muffled voices were heard behind the door. "Is this John?" the woman asked. "Does anyone know?" "I think it's John," she insisted. Then Brad Mullens chimed in. "Did someone say someone wasn't feeling well there?" "Alice thinks it's John," Tom explained. "His voice is strange." "Where's Karen?" Alice asked worriedly. "Someone called Karen." "He sat with us most of the evening," added Albert Burke. "I don't think he drank that much." "Maybe it's the flu." "It's not the season," Alice objected. "He definitely didn't drink that much," Albert insisted. And then, as if a mockery from fate itself, Carl's cheerful voice rang out. "Well, you know, some people just don't know how to drink." "Everything is fine with me," I shouted. "Everything is fine with me, and I'm going out." Getting up and flushing the water, I went to the sink and splashed water in my face. The voices outside the door died down, and soon I heard a cautious knock again. This time he was quiet and a little unsure. "John?" It was Karen's voice, sounding with notes of concern. "John, are you okay there?" I took a deep breath, suppressing the answer that was rushing out. Then I turned around, opened the door, and looked her straight in the eyes. "The girls and I are leaving," I said sharply. "Right now. If you don't want to leave, don't leave. Let your damn lover take you home. I don't care." Karen's eyes widened and her face paled slightly. Evidently, thoughts were racing through her head, not least the fact that I didn't check to see if we were alone before mentioning her lover. In a fit of rage, I could very easily reveal her dirty secret to everyone. Well, don't expect an apology, trash. You could very well accidentally reveal yourself with your stupid idea. Do you have the courage to be afraid that someone has finally noticed you and rumors have already begun to circulate? I think you'll be thinking about this now, won't you? Clearly, she understood that something terrible must have happened to make me so angry. She knew I could hold my own, she knew I didn't drink much, and she knew me well enough to know that I was truly furious. So it was quite telling to me that she didn't ask what was wrong or act like she was upset. Apparently, she just didn't want to know the truth. Just let me. Grab my purse." She muttered, "I'll be right back. Don't leave without me," and she hurried back towards the party. As soon as she left, the house was empty again. Everyone seemed to be trying to give me some privacy while I was recovering from what they thought was too much drinking. I took my keys out of my pocket, walked into the living room, and tried to calm down a little. Looking through the glass door on the veranda, I saw Karen grab her purse from where she had left it and throw a few apologetic goodbye words to the people she had recently laughed at as she hurried past. Carl approached her, trying to appear indifferent, although he did not do it well. He said something to her, and a short conversation ensued between them. Carl looked slightly worried, and Karen showed noticeable irritation. Irritation that became increasingly stronger, manifested in gestures and facial expressions. Her face turned red, her eyes widened, and she began to gesticulate wildly. If I didn't know the whole situation, I might have thought that I was watching a little lover's quarrel. Finally, driven to the edge, Carl came almost close to her and said something through clenched teeth. Her shoulders jerked sharply upward, almost to her ears, and she began to look around, apparently fearing that someone might notice them. Nobody, however, paid attention. She looked at Carl again, stepped back, and he said something else to her, causing her to shake her head. He continued talking, and she shook her head again. He came even closer to her, this time looking at her with the expression of an offended puppy, and said something final. She froze, nodded barely, and, without looking back, turned and left. I watched him stare after her, noticing the smug half-smile that appeared on his face as soon as she turned away. I could hardly restrain myself from venting my anger. The drive home was in complete silence. Karen looked out the window, practically without any expression on her face. I wondered what she was thinking. Did she feel shame for her behavior? Were you afraid that you had gone too far? Or was she angry at me for ruining her entire evening? Perhaps she was annoyed with Carl for dragging her into this adventure, which now, perhaps, made her regret it. Or was she simply happy with the time spent and didn't care about the rest? Who knows, maybe she didn't think about me at all, and perhaps it was for the best. When we got home, the kids ran downstairs to play video games, and Karen grabbed an open bottle of Chardonnay from the refrigerator. She glanced at me, probably wondering if she should offer me a glass, but I immediately went to the bathroom in the bedroom and locked myself in there. I turned on the shower, let the water heat up, and then stepped into the shower stall and just stood under the stream of water. I didn't think so. I didn't feel it. I didn't imagine, I didn't dream, I didn't desire nothing. I just stood there, letting the water flow over me, just as I hoped that someday it would all pass, wash away, flow away without leaving a trace. I let the water flow over me and then go down the drain, hoping that this pain would someday go there too. The next day, Karen did apologize, although it was a short and completely non-specific sorry. It was obvious that she did not want to go into detail, even to find out what exactly I saw or understood. Typical behavior of a cheating spouse. She tried to smooth out and reduce the disgustingness of her act at the same moment, when it would seem she was making an attempt to apologize. After several minutes of tense conversation and several awkward pauses, she hesitantly suggested, "Maybe we'll all feel better after our trip to the zoo tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" I tilted my head, feigning surprise. "We won't go tomorrow." "Of course we'll go. We—" "Karen, you got the days mixed up. Today is Saturday. We're leaving today." "No," she said with a patient tone and looked at me sideways. "We are going on Sunday. We discussed this." I shook my head, as if in annoyance. "God, what are you even talking about? We have a trip to the zoo planned for Saturday, Karen. Today, we repeated this over and over again. Don't you remember?" She blinked, her gaze darting to the side, and I could see her trying to do the math in her head. She looked so confused that I almost wanted to grin. Is it difficult to lead a double life when you lose control of one of them? In fact, the truth was on her side. We actually agreed to go on Sunday when we discussed the trip earlier in the week. But the more I remembered her outburst at the party, and especially that kiss, the less I wanted to be around her. So the night before, when I put the girls to bed, I told them that if they were good, we would go to the zoo a day early. Now Karen looked determined. "You're wrong," she insisted. "I'm sure we were talking about Sunday." I studied her with my eyes, letting the irritation from her latest antics show on my face so that she could mistake it for annoyance at her forgetfulness. Then I turned and shouted into the living room, "Hey girls, what are we going to do today?" "We're going to the zoo," they both shouted in ecstatic unison. I turned to Karen with a tired look on my face. "See," I said, "today, even the girls know. So stop this circus. And in general, I don't understand why this is so important. It's just one day. No difference, right?" She looked embarrassed. "Actually," she drawled, "I already have plans for today." I managed to feign surprise. Well, honey, I saw how you built them, right in front of everyone at our friend's party. Or do you still think you're so smart that no one notices?" But I only raised my eyebrows slightly, as if feigning disappointment. Of course, I was happy about this. Although their conversation with Carl was more than obvious, and I was sure that they had something planned, there was always the risk of error. After all, these plans could have been for Monday, or next weekend, or even in a month. The only thing I was sure of was that they were definitely up to something. I hoped that their meeting was scheduled for the near future. What I saw through the window seemed like this. "Have we agreed on tomorrow yet?" "I don't know, Carl. He's very angry. Maybe I'm better." "No need. It's his choice. He gave you permission. Reluctant consent. Or maybe just guilt. I shouldn't." "Puppy, look. You're hurting me, baby." "Fine. Pause. Okay, I'll come." And then she left. Their conversation may not have been exactly like this, but I knew what I saw, an agreement that was confirmed and accepted. Honestly, I hoped she wouldn't give up on her plans. The last thing I want to do is spend the day next to her, talking and sharing my life. I didn't want to be around her, and if that meant she had to be with him, then so be it. She shifted her weight to her other leg, still awaiting a response, most likely in the form of anger. It's better to play on this. I don't have to pretend to be mad at her, right? "Plans?" I growled, shaking my head. "Are you kidding me, Karen? Those nasty games you were playing yesterday weren't enough for you too? Can't you dedicate at least one day to your family before you run away to him again?" She reacted with irritation. "It was your idea. I'm just following your rules." Yeah, so he really insisted on it. It was an argument she never would have thought of on her own, but it sounded exactly like something Carl might say. "Anyway," she huffed irritably, "it's just one day. Girls will understand." "They won't have to," I snapped, "because we are going to the zoo, with or without you." "Just try," she gasped. "These are my children too. You're not going to start." "You're right," I interrupted. "I'm not going to start. I'm not going to start changing plans. I'm not going to start cutting back on time with my family. I'm not going to start adjusting my life to your fucking sins. What is mine?" She flashed her eyes at me. "Listen, dear, if you don't like the idea of me." I jumped to my feet, and she recoiled with a cry. Honestly, it seems to me that she herself already wanted to stop before I started moving, so at least I'll give her credit for that. She could go so far as to seethe with contempt for me, but not so much that it didn't make her feel at least a little ashamed. We stood opposite each other, angry, not knowing what to do next in such a situation. Then her face contorted with anger, and she hissed, "Great. Let it be your way. Do you want to play mommy while I spend the day having sex with Carl? Please. Tomorrow, when I pick up the girls from school, we'll do something fun with them." She turned around, giving me a dark, confident look over her shoulder. "Without you," and left the room. I shook my head, trying to suppress my resentment. Isn't that what I wanted? Should I move her away from me? Give yourself some peace and quiet. Maybe even forget about your problems and enjoy time with your children. So why did Victor feel as empty and heavy as defeat? I went to the girls and told them that mommy wouldn't be able to go to the zoo, but we could go there as soon as they got dressed and brushed their teeth. Since this did not affect their ability to go to the zoo, there was no particular reaction from them. They just pretended to be upset, then ran to get ready. I smiled involuntarily. Such simple wishes. Then I sat down and opened the newspaper, waiting for the girls to be ready. During all this time, I did not hear a sound from Karen. Perhaps she had already packed her things and quietly left the house immediately after our argument. The thought that she could already leave, and that I wouldn't have to see her leave, brought some kind of exhausted relief. At least I won't hear that stupid "bye, Daddy" of hers again. The sound of water in the bathroom flew past my ears, a sure sign that the girls were already brushing their teeth. I got up and started packing everything I needed for our trip to the zoo. I was just finishing up when they joyfully ran into the kitchen, full of energy and fun. I was lost in this pure and simple joy for a moment. "Well, are you ready?" I asked. "Ready," they assured me. "Do you know what?" Susie interjected, smiling a toothless smile. "Mom is coming with us too." Before I could explain that Mom wouldn't actually be able to go, Karen hesitantly entered the room. She had a look of genuine regret on her face and looked as if she was getting ready to spend the day with us at the zoo. "Well, you have to." I turned away, feeling, what? Disappointment? Anger? Relief? Did I even know what I was feeling? "I decided to join after all," I said, and it sounded more like a statement than a question. "Is this?" She leaned over, making sure the girls didn't hear, and whispered, "Is it normal?" I shrugged. "There's nothing you can do now. They've already decided." She shuddered. "It seems like I can be a real fool sometimes, don't I?" "If only you could fully understand this." I just shrugged, not knowing what to do. My plans had failed, and now I had to spend the whole day next to her. It was no longer possible to do any reboot. The children were jumping under our feet with impatience. Karen decided to stay, and there was nothing I could do about it. But why didn't it feel so bad? "Thank you, Carl. You even let me down here." "Okay," I said, noticing that the girls were starting to lose patience. "There's no point in waiting. Let's go." It turned out to be a surprisingly pleasant day. I was sure that the growing estrangement between me and Karen would hang like a dark cloud over everything that should bring joy, but somehow it turned out the opposite. The joy of joint adventures seemed to obscure all the darkness for a while. Of course, what once connected us no longer existed for a long time, but it was still a part of our lives for many years, and so it was easy to pretend that it had never gone away. For several wonderful hours, my family was together again. The girls contributed a lot to this. They laughed, ran around, and felt absolutely calm, knowing that their parents were watching over them. They did not realize that the concept of parents as a whole no longer existed. For them, the world was still the way it should be, and in their seething fantasy world, for a moment it almost became true. There was a simple, quiet understanding between Karen and me. It began, of course, with silence. For my part, I intended to keep it as long as possible. But of course, this turned out to be impossible. You can't take your children through the labyrinth of freedom, choice, and open spaces without talking at least a little with your spouse. So, inevitably, I had to allow short conversations. And it ruined everything. "Where are we going next?" led to, "We loved it at the Tropical Pavilion last year. Do you remember?" This led to a small smile and a pleasant memory, and then to more communication. This may sound familiar to you. Perhaps you know. When there is so much common past between you, the rebellion of the soul sometimes begins with a warm memory. Before you know it, you're already discussing the safest and warmest topic in the world, moments from the past when your children were happy. Strangely, we seemed to get along better that day than we had in years, even though the reasons were sad. I saw how it affected Karen. Her cheeks turned pink, and she couldn't stop smiling. For me, it was like being plunged into a fog of new feelings, like being caught up in the charm of a relationship at the very beginning. It's strange, and perhaps inexplicable, but it was still true. Oddly enough, but for these few hours, everything seemed almost like the beginning. As we walked back to the car and the sun was setting, I realized that I was having such a good time that it had been hours since I'd thought about Karen's infidelity since I learned the truth. Is it possible to ask for a greater gift from life than the opportunity to forget? Well, they say the devil is in the details. I don't know if this is true, but he is definitely a master at strategic strikes. About 10 minutes passed from the moment we drove away from the zoo and were driving along the highway towards home, when the most ordinary of sounds abruptly pulled me out of the essentially stupid illusion in which I was. Karen's phone vibrated in her bag. It could have been almost anyone, but she didn't even try to check who was calling and didn't answer. She simply covered her bag with her coat to muffle the sound and stared out the window until the call stopped. That in itself already told me everything I needed. And as soon as she covered the bag with her coat, everything joyful and light about that day disappeared. The moment was lost. But it was even more than just disappointment. I suddenly felt more tired and drained than I had ever felt in my life. It's like a prisoner being told he's being led to freedom, saying goodbye and dreaming of the future, only to find himself being led into a room with an injection table. I focused on the road and tried not to think. I just wished that this day had never happened to avoid the feelings I was experiencing now. Karen and the girls continued to keep the mood positive by having fun discussing everything we had done today. I also inserted something from time to time to maintain appearances, but my heart was no longer in it. When we got home and closed the garage, I stayed in the car while the others headed into the house. "Aren't you going?" Karen asked when she noticed that I wasn't coming out. "I need a minute," I answered quietly, continuing to look forward, as if I could still see the road in front of me. "Is something wrong?" she frowned. "No." Silence. She didn't leave. "You are sure?" "I'm just tired," I said, trying to control myself. "Please." She took a deep breath and gently touched my hand. "Just a minute," I insisted. "Can I just have my moment before I go in?" She winced and opened her mouth as if she wanted to say something else, but then sighed and followed the girls into the house. I don't know what happened next. Maybe it was the burden of feelings that I had been carrying within myself for so long. Maybe I just went over the edge. Or maybe I was just that unhappy. I can't say for sure. But as soon as the door closed behind them, I buried my forehead in the steering wheel and burst into tears like a child. It was unlike anything I had ever experienced. I've never been a crybaby, even as a child. But now I cried the way a parent grieves on a birthday without a child. I cried like the last person at a funeral. And this went on and on. All I wanted was to stop, take a deep breath, and feel in control again. But every new sob seemed to tear me apart from the inside. When the tears finally began to subside, I felt so relieved that I almost laughed. For a moment, it even seemed to me that it would never end. I sat up straight, put my hand to my chest, and focused on calm, deep breathing until I felt like I could go inside. I thought I could go into the bathroom and wash my face, and no one would know that Then I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. No. I turned around. Our eyes met. She stood just a few steps away, covering her mouth with her hand, her eyes full of tears and an expression of guilt and pain on her face that I hated to see. And then she turned around and ran back into the house. Damn it. Damn it. I hit the steering wheel, tried to find something else that I could hit, but I couldn't find anything, so I hit the steering wheel again. Damn, damn, damn. Only one thing. That's all I asked for. Just one little thing that I could keep just for myself. She didn't leave the house that night, but we barely spoke. I pretended to watch TV, and she pretended not to notice that I knew she was looking at me. After the girls went to bed, Karen went out into the backyard, took out her phone, and talked for almost an hour. Her face was tense, and her eyes were downcast. "Hi," Karen hesitantly broke the silence on Sunday morning. "Did you sleep well?" "I hardly slept. Almost never, lately." "I slept fine." She blew on the coffee. "Thank you for yesterday. I had a great time." She looked at me, sorry about how it ended. "Me too." Long pause. "John." "Yes? Why are you making fun of yourself like that?" "Control yourself. We have already talked about this." "I know. It's just, I think there must be some other way, some way that we can. I looked sharply at her, and she fell silent. Then I stood up, poured the rest of the cereal into the trash, and left the room. I spent the next few hours doing chores and surfing the internet. Karen didn't try to talk to me again, and for a while I thought the hint was clear. Then, shortly after lunch, she took the girls to a friend's house, and when she returned, she disappeared into the bedroom. I didn't think much of it. I heard the shower turn on, and I guess I just assumed she was going out on a date again. This got her out of my way, and it's not that I need her. So why did the thought of this still torment me? Why did everything inside twist, as if the insides were caught between two huge gears? I pushed this question away, banished it from my mind, and tried to distract myself. As if that ever helped. In fact, it turned out to be much worse than I could have imagined, because half an hour later the door to my office opened and Karen appeared on the threshold, looking fit and seductive in a lace bra and tiny panties that sat so low that I was surprised. How I didn't see the top of her uniform. She stood there, tense and self-confident, as if she knew how gorgeous she looked, and that I definitely couldn't remain indifferent. "The girls are not at home," she said in a soft, seductive voice, which only people who are confident in their irresistibility can speak. "I thought that maybe you would like to spend time together." "Don't do this, Karen," I warned. "This won't help anything. Things will only get worse." She took a step forward, her movements deliberately smooth and graceful. "I'm not trying to fix anything. I just want to show." "Stop." I interrupted sharply when she came even closer. "Don't you dare come closer. Not now. And certainly not in this form." Her face tensed, but she ignored my words and continued to approach. "Come on, dear. You know I can make it worth it." I stood up abruptly, hitting the table with my palms. I said stop. She froze, and her confidence evaporated slightly. "Please, John," she said, continuing in a different tone, playing the role of a vulnerable woman since the role of a seductress had not worked. "I just want to be close to you. I sincerely want to. I missed this more than you probably wouldn't believe." I looked at her with an expression that should have let her know what I thought about her words. "Tell me one thing," I said sharply. "Who taught you to wear such underwear? Because I don't exactly remember you wearing anything like that for me." "Never." She shuddered. "I like it," she replied, shifting her weight a little unsteadily from one foot to the other, like a timid speaker. "I thought you'd like it too." "And for whom are you shaving yours?" I took a short pause and continued. "Because you never did it for me either." I walked around the table and walked past her to the door. "What about a haircut? Do you think I don't know who helped you choose it? And all that fitness that makes you look so fit? What type of exercise do you do exactly? Pilates? Yoga? No, I highly doubt it." I stood in the doorway, turned to her, and shook my head. She looked embarrassed, perhaps even a little humiliated. "Welcome to the club." Her eyes sparkled with unshed tears. "I wouldn't touch you for anything," I added angrily, spitting on the floor to emphasize my point. "You see, I made a vow to be faithful to my wife, to share myself only with her, and I continue to adhere to that vow. This means something to me, and right now." I glanced at her full of contempt. "My wife is not here." I slammed the door behind me. The next time I saw Karen, she was wearing sweatpants and curled up in a chair, mindlessly flicking through channels on the TV. She didn't look at me as I walked past, although her jaw tensed. I don't think she expected me to notice. So much the better for me. For the next 2 weeks, she continued to play the role of part of the family that had worked so well for her before when we went to the zoo. She still glanced furtively in my direction, clearly checking to see if even the slightest crack had appeared on the ice that separated us. She also didn't mention or ask for time to meet with Carl, which I assumed was also part of her strategy. I knew that they continued to see each other. It couldn't be otherwise. But exactly how she did it remained a mystery to me. On Thursday of week 2, I decided to do a little research. A little after lunch, I picked up the phone and called her at the office, calling her by name. "May I know who's calling?" I rarely contacted her through work channels, preferring to text her if I needed to contact her. "This is her husband," I explained. There was silence for a moment on the other end of the line. "Did something happen?" I asked. "Sorry, sir, but Mrs. Sanders is out of town right now." "Yeah, Mrs. Sanders. So you don't believe that I'm her husband? Probably because she told you who she intends to spend this time with. I wasn't going to cover for her." "Okay, thanks. I'll talk to her when she gets home, wherever she is from." I chuckled and hung up, without a single note of humor in my voice. I thought about this new information. I already knew that she used up a lot of her vacation, secretly dating behind my back before I decided to sort things out. She seemed to be up to her old tricks again, continuing to date her lover while pretending to try to mend our relationship. But it doesn't work that way, honey. It's time for a little lesson. I arranged everything quietly and carefully. I announced the news to the family over the weekend. "Come on, guess what awaits us all," I said with a smile at dinner. "We're going to Disneyland." The girls immediately screamed with delight, squealing and bombarding me with the funniest questions. I tried my best to answer them, but Karen looked at me across the table, and doubt, shock, anger, and horror were strangely mixed in her gaze. "Disneyland," she muttered, almost to herself. Then she frowned and leaned forward. "We can't afford this, John. Our finances are already in dire straits." She said the last phrase with a little more emphasis. I knew what she really meant. I just shrugged. "Yes, it cost us a lot, but everything has already been paid for and organized. Next time, we definitely won't be able to afford it, if that's what you mean, so we'll have to make the most of this trip." I winked at the girls and laid out all the details. The trip was large-scale, lasting a whole week, and virtually wiped out all the financial achievements of the last 7 or 8 years. It was the type of "I deserve a reward" mistake that makes financiers scrunch their faces grimly, multiplied several times over. I even rented an apartment, not a hotel room, so that we could have our own base with all everyday amenities. By the end of my story, Karen was even more stunned. I I can't believe you spent all our money without even consulting me," she drawled. "Oh, are we suddenly consulting each other before making decisions regarding marriage now?" I smiled. Then he put the forkful of food in his mouth and shrugged. "I think this is the last year that the girls are not too old for something like this. Soon it won't be magical anymore, so it's now or never. And we obviously need family time, so." She turned pale at these words. "But it's so much money. We'll be fine as long as there are no surprise medical bills, no cars breaking down, and no need to take unpaid time off from work." She became even paler. "John, I, uh, I'm not sure I have enough vacation days for that." "Is it true?" I pretended to be surprised. She blushed and looked down. "I kind of used them already, a lot of them, actually." I put my fork down. "You've been with the company a long time, Karen. I'm sure I've accumulated enough vacation days over all these years." Her blush became even brighter. I I spent it all, actually, or almost everything. And I'm starting to get really behind on some big projects because I've been away from work for so long lately. Read the expression on my face yourself, bitch. You weren't at work last time?" She did not raise her head, but only nodded slightly. I pretended to consider this information and then stood up. "So the honesty in our relationship that you told me about didn't seem to include any mention of meeting him," I muttered. "You know, I really believed for a while that you were trying to be part of the family again, Karen. But it seems like we can never be enough for you, do we?" I left the room without looking back. She didn't even try to follow me. Sitting down with a book in the living room, I allowed myself a slight smile. Mission accomplished. I'll be able to spend a whole week at Disneyland with my daughters and a whole week away from my cheating wife. And the best thing is that it was all her own doing. Karen's mother came to see us a few days later. I'm not sure if she noticed the tension between us, but if she did, she would probably be pleased. She never really liked me. To be honest, I think she probably hated me, but she had that feminine ability to say it without saying it directly. I'd love to tell you that I don't understand why, but she was a church nerd and I'm an honest atheist, so anything I might say or do didn't matter to her. I will forever remain poisonous to her. I wonder what she would think if she found out that her perfect daughter was cuckolding me. Would you be happy, or would I be too scandalized to appreciate my suffering? Honestly, I think her reaction would depend on who was there to see her. At first, she noticed that I had lost weight. Even men should buy new clothes if they decide to lose weight, John. She rolled her eyes as she said this. However, you should know that not everyone is suited to being thin. I'm not losing weight, I replied. I just don't feel like eating. Well, try to change that before you lose another size. She smiled tightly at her daughter. I don't think anyone would like that. Karen, as if in response to her mother's words, quietly began preparing my favorite dish that evening and spent the entire dinner biting her lips, glancing at me, waiting for me to start eating. John, she said softly at one point, glancing at the girls and clearly choosing her words more carefully, it's already hard for them to force themselves to eat if Dad sets a bad example for them. I looked at her long and hard, mentally going through thousands of possible answers. But she was right. I sighed and twirled the fork in my hands. I'm just not feeling well. I'll go to bed early. This should at least calm her down a little. Now I am no longer setting a bad example. But she only seemed to huff in annoyance as I left the room and headed towards the bedroom. Over the next few weeks, Karen tried to talk to me more than once about going to Disneyland. Basically, she was just trying to talk me out of the idea. At first, she apologized and expressed regret that she did not have enough vacation days. But as I continued to ignore her attempts, she became increasingly irritable and angry. In the last few days before the trip, her behavior became downright mean. She would throw references to her affair in my face and make quiet, snarky remarks about how at least she wouldn't have to go to Disneyland to have fun. I ignored her. It's strange, but for the first time since the beginning of her betrayal, these comments did not hurt me. Karen quickly noticed this, and for some reason I still don't understand, her first reaction was to feel offended. I still remember the moment when she made another sarcastic comment about spending a whole week with Carl, and something in my equanimity told her that it no longer hurt me to hear it. She immediately fell silent. I looked at her, and she looked at me like a child whose father had just hit him and called him a girl of easy virtue. Then, as if realizing it with lightning speed, she ran out of the room. I just shook my head and went back to my journal. I was no longer going to try to understand her strange behavioral reactions. I knew from my own experience that this was a lost cause. But for some reason, this image stuck firmly in my memory and prevented me from concentrating on the article. After a while, I put the magazine aside and did something that I'm not particularly proud of. I went to the cabinet above the stove, which only I could reach, felt in the very depths of the old pack of cigarettes, and took it out. I left this pack there 2 years ago when I finally quit smoking. It was an action familiar to any addicted person. I felt better simply because she was at hand. But even despite all the events that happened, I never once had the desire to touch them until this moment. I was standing on the back porch when she found me. "When did you start smoking again?" she asked. I took a drag. "Just now," I coughed. Not as good as I remembered. But I still took another drag. She was silent for several minutes. "Did you want something?" I asked. I wanted to apologize. Hell, I don't even know what I was like. But I was like that, and it has to stop. I shrugged. "You know, I finally understand why you did it," she said. "All this time I was so narcissistic that I really thought it was me. I thought that you couldn't live without me, or that you might even be turned on by all this." She smiled bitterly. "And then, tonight, when I threw another snarky comment at you and you didn't react. Your words would have hurt me if we had switched places. But you," she said in surprise, "you just let them pass you by." She said. "All this time I was so narcissistic that I really thought it was me. I thought that you couldn't live without me, or that you might even be turned on by all this." She smiled bitterly. "And then, tonight, when I threw another snarky comment at you and you didn't react. Your words would have hurt me if we had switched places. But you, she said in surprise, you just let them pass you by. And at that moment I realized that I was no longer holding you. Then I realized that you had finally broken up with me. I took another drag and threw the cigarette away. It was about the girls, right? You did all this for them. I nodded. And they were so happy. You did an amazing job protecting them from all of this, she sobbed. You ruined your life so they could be children a little longer. I said nothing. You will take photos, right? At Disneyland? She wrapped her arms around herself. They will never forget this trip. This will be such a wonderful memory. She suddenly began to sob. This is the only way I can survive it. Of course, I'll take photos. But I didn't say anything more and didn't try to hug her. I just let her cry. Now she was someone else's problem. Thank you, she finally said when she pulled herself together. Thank you for the photos. She then disappeared into the house. Disneyland was amazing. The girls enjoyed every moment. One of the most wonderful things about children is their ability to make waiting in line an adventure as long as they have someone nearby. I actually took a lot of pictures and let the girls call their mom every night to tell her about their experiences on the trip. And not at all with the intention of annoying. The fact that their joyful cries added to her misery was just a nice bonus. Other than these calls, I honestly have no idea what Karen was doing during this time. But I know one thing. She almost never appeared in my thoughts, and in no language in the world can I find words that could express what a relief it was for me. Suddenly, I could sleep at night again and taste food again. It was a feeling of clarity and strength, as if I was under the influence of powerful psychotropic drugs. The last few months had been absolute hell, but now I felt like I had finally reached a point where she couldn't hurt me anymore. However, there was one obvious flaw in this logic, which was, at the very least, that I had no interest in sex. Or perhaps this is not quite the correct wording. So, there were a lot of beautiful women around. Under the sun, they looked even more attractive, and I could appreciate their appearance, even admire it from afar, but I could not imagine myself as a sexy person. No matter how happy I was about the success I had achieved, my ego and self-esteem were still destroyed due to Karen's betrayal. When we met, I was in the prime of my life, young, athletic, with a full head of hair, and from the moment we met, I devoted myself to her. But even this was not enough. If all I had to offer, my absolute maximum, was not enough for her, what could I possibly offer anyone else? This logic, of course, was stupid. But betraying a loved one is like falling from a height. The more you love them, the higher the height from which you fall, and the more confused you are the moment you hit the ground. If someone tells you that they were able to just get up, dust off their pants, and move on, know that they probably didn't fall very far. So no, I didn't feel sexy and I wasn't completely healed. But that was okay. I was pleased with the progress I had made, and the desire to fully experience sexual desire again scared me as much as it interested me. Long story short, we had a wonderful week and then returned home. Karen seemed a little sad and withdrawn when we returned, although she certainly asked the girls questions about their trip and genuinely smiled and laughed with them. She continued to meet with Carl, but a different, less expressive energy appeared in her. She was no longer as cheerful and joyful as she had been in recent months. For me, I probably noticed this, but didn't take the time to think about the meaning of these changes. I was glad that she finally understood where we stood and was now trying to live with it instead of trying to change the status quo. However, I felt a slight sense of tension when, 3 weeks after my return, Karen cautiously asked if I would like to go to Bailey's next party. I didn't even know they were having a party, I answered slowly. They called a few days ago and invited us, Karen explained. She gave me a nervous look. If you don't want. I frowned, remembering how Bailey's last party ended, but then I brushed the thoughts aside. Girls like it, I said, and we both knew that that alone was enough of an answer. I won't go anywhere near him, she assured. Don't waste our time on promises that mean nothing. but I still hoped that this time she meant it. She rolled over, fidgeted, and crumpled the pillow. A minute later, she turned around again and scratched her shoulder irritably. Then she sighed heavily and rolled over again. I just lay in the dark and listened. I played this game for a long time and even waited for the calm silence that the night brings. This was something new for her, and I had no doubt that she hated it. Looks like Tom Bailey is doing well at work. They renovated the kitchen and replaced all the furniture on the patio. The sun was starting to set, the alcohol was already getting to my head a little, and everything was going pretty well until she leaned over to me and whispered in my ear, "Please stop looking at him." I muttered something, returned my attention to the couple with whom we were sitting, but did not react at all. However, I still couldn't resist looking at it again, just to make sure it was still going on. It was still going on. This constant distraction must have made our conversation less than ideal, because after a few minutes, the other couple excused themselves and left. "Honestly, John," Karen pleaded, "you have to stop looking at him. Forget he's even here." "He's looking at me," I said sharply, "and it pisses me off." In fact, he stared rather than looked, and did so for most of the evening. His facial expression changed from an icy grimace to a mocking grin. Basically, he looked like a petulant child. He also drank too much, which in my opinion was a bad combination, so I thought he was worth keeping an eye on. "He's just jealous," Karen said with a frown, looking around to make sure no one could hear us. "And to be honest, he behaves incredibly childishly. But there's nothing we can do now, so please just ignore him. This is the best way. Try to ignore someone who's been staring at the back of your head all evening. It's almost as hard as ignoring someone who stabs you in the back." She crossed her arms over her chest and began shaking her leg nervously. "Well, I wish he would just go home. He makes a fool of himself. Maybe you should take him home. I think that's what he wants." Her face turned red. She opened her mouth, then closed it and turned away. "You know," she said dreamily, "for a while it even seemed to me that we were having a good time. I agreed with you for a while. That was before someone's eyes started boring into the back of my head. How does he even think that people won't notice if he sits and stares at me for 3 hours?" She finished her drink too quickly. "He's being childish," she repeated, as if that was the answer in itself. So we sat, both in a bad mood, and I began to think thoughtfully. "How did it start?" I asked, trying to speak calmly. She just took a deep breath and continued not looking at me. "Honestly, Karen, the only thing I still don't understand from all these notes and conversations is how it all started in the first place. I don't want to talk about it, and certainly not here. Well, was it some kind of intrigue or—" "If you want me to say that I wish this had never happened," she replied sharply, "then you don't have to drag it out of me. I regret it every damn day. I'm not trying to pull anything out, and I don't want to argue. It's just—" I shook my head. "I just don't understand how you could do this to me," I admitted. There was no pain or anger in my voice. It was just a cold fact. "I don't understand how you could do this to the us, you know. With us, Karen. With the girls. Do you understand that I would die for you? This is not an exaggeration." I shook my head again. "I would have died. I still have someone to die for. Only it has nothing to do with you anymore. Damn you." She covered her mouth with her hand, holding back tears. "Don't you dare do this to me now." I shrugged. "Okay. Sorry." I looked at the sunset. "You know, sometimes it just comes over me at the most unexpected moments. You don't have to apologize to me for this." "Maybe not, but I still do it." I looked around. He left. "Do you think he went home?" "I don't want to think about him." I studied the bottle of beer. A strange desire came over me. "Well, do you want to dance?" She didn't answer, probably thinking I was being sarcastic. "Come on," I teased her. "What do you say? I'm no better than I was, but I'm unlikely to be any worse." Now she was looking at me. "It's hard to believe that you ever wanted to dance with me." "Why?" Pause. "I wouldn't want to dance with me." Great answer. "Look, you don't have to understand. I don't need to understand it either. Let's just dance. A timid smile lit up her face. But there's not even music here. A couple of minutes later, we stood on the lawn at the edge of the terrace, swaying to non-existent tunes playing in our heads. We didn't snuggle up to each other, didn't put our heads on our shoulders, nothing like that. We just held hands and swayed slightly. Some of the other couples glanced at us from time to time, probably thinking they were witnessing a touching moment. But it wasn't him. It was more like concluding a truce. You know, she said, looking somewhere over my shoulder, this is the closest physical communication between us since. She lowered her head without finishing her sentence. I'm aware of it. Her lips moved slightly, and I could almost see the internal conversation going on in her head. I waited, knowing that as soon as she figured it out, she would invite me into this conversation. I want to be on your side, she finally said, looking at me with sadness in her eyes. I want to be on the side that is aimed at making life easier for girls. You're already on this side. You were on it from the very beginning. She snorted. Only when it was convenient for me, or when you force me there. Fair. There are some rules about being on this side that I don't think you'll like. I don't have to like them. Tell me and I will live up to your expectations. There is only one rule, actually. Here it is. If you ever try to take them away from me, I will kill you. Without hesitation, without remorse, without regret, like putting a dog to sleep. I will take your life for this. I continued to dance. I said this non-threateningly and without the slightest intention of intimidation. It was just another cold fact. To Karen's credit, she didn't tense up or try to pull away. That's why I know you're a good father, she said quietly. That night I was thirsty and went into the kitchen to pour myself some water. Her phone sat on the counter, vibrating, and the screen was backlit. I glanced at him. 17 missed calls, all this evening. All after the party was over. Saturday morning is a lonely time to go to the grocery store. There was almost no one in the store, and those who did come were mostly men over 40. The older woman behind the counter noticed me looking around, or maybe she was just being talkative. We call it Divorced Dad's Day, she explained with a smile. On Saturday mornings, all the divorced fathers go shopping. She leaned towards me conspiratorially, and her plump figure pressed slightly against the scanner. I think it's because there are no happy couples here to remind them that they are single. All happy people are at home with their families. I just looked at her without reacting. After a moment, she straightened up, interpreting this as a sign that she had made a mistake. Sorry, she muttered, rushing to finish packing. On your finger, and just assumed. Apparently, Karen meant what she said because the next few weeks went pretty smoothly. At home, she was all smiles, and we even managed quite well as a family team. Basically, she tried to plan her absence so that it would have minimal impact on the girls. And maybe, just maybe, she was trying to lessen her influence on me too. But despite this, I began to get tired of constantly being at home and began to go out with the girls more often during Karen's absence. Before the end of the summer, we went on 2 more short trips and visited several interesting places within a radius of 100 kilometers from home. I also replaced my sedan with a newer, roomier van, a family car not much different from the one Karen was quick to trade in, and bought a decent extendable trailer. Karen steadfastly accepted these trips without her participation, although I could see that it was painful for her to miss such valuable moments. She didn't complain, although the dark circles under her eyes became more noticeable and her smile looked sadder and sadder. She started taking something to help her fall asleep at night, although it didn't seem to help much. However, she did not hide her concerns about the financial impact of such trips. I understand this is justified, John, she said one evening, sorting through a stack of bills and statements, and I am fully aware that I have no right to lecture you. But these are all unnecessary expenses, and they simply ruin us. You have long exceeded our income, and we are deeply in debt. If you don't stop, and quickly, we'll never be able to retire. After all, that is, who wants to retire? I grinned. Look, We have trust funds from my parents' legacy to pay for college and support girls as they begin their lives, and your retirement is still a long way off. To be honest, I'm not going to stop working. I can't even imagine what I would do if I had to sit idle sitting at home for years. I smiled bitterly. I would probably do something stupid, like get addicted to alcohol. She bit her lip, putting aside the statements and bills. There were times when you talked about selling your house, buying a motorhome, and traveling around the country, she noted, just for the two of us looking for adventure. I gave a short, contemptuous laugh, and she turned away. I guess that's all in the past now, huh? You couldn't seriously think that I still wanted to do this to you. She gave me that same sad smile. For a long time, I didn't think at all, she admitted. I just acted without thinking about what my actions would lead to. Well, what can I say to this? It's clear. Then I decided to move on to the inevitable. You know, at some point, we'll probably have to sit down and decide how old the girls need to be before we can safely finalize the divorce. Her eyes went wide and her face went pale, but I ignored it. After all, she knew this would happen. We never intended to make this permanent. I thought maybe a little after they went to college it would be safe. This way they will be distracted. But she was no longer there. She ran out of the room. The chair she was sitting on was lying on the floor, and papers were scattered all over the floor. I collected them and started putting them into piles. There was silence between us for a few days after that, and then everything returned to normal. In fact, this norm continued for several weeks, and I began to think that perhaps we had finally found a system that worked for us. After all, there was no need for divorce yet. This moment was still years away. Winter was late. Changeable weather left October with damp dew instead of the usual dry coolness and the first snowfalls. I think I noticed that Karen had been spending more and more time at home in recent weeks, and that she had started leaving her phone on charge when we went out as a family, but I didn't think much about what that might mean. Mostly, I was just hoping things would continue as they were, so I was completely unprepared when she sat down on the couch across from me one night, looking tired and worried, and said it was all over. "I can't do this anymore, John," she explained. "It's too hard, and I'm ashamed of myself all the time. I can't live like this anymore." I held my breath, but said nothing. She folded her hands and stared at them. You know, sometimes when I'm all alone, or when I'm in the shower, I just start crying and can't stop. I'm trying to pull myself together, but I can't. No matter what I do, I just cry and I can't stop. She shook her head bitterly, and then her voice became harsher. "You, of course, did your best to make me understand this, that I must follow your rules in order to save myself. You made me think that time would somehow solve all the problems I created if I just moved on step by step. For a while, I even thought I was lucky." She shook her head again, faster and more harshly. "But anyway, it's over now. You can do whatever you want, but I'm telling you here and now, this is the end." I sat motionless, only my eyes moved slightly. I was completely unprepared for this. "I warned you what would happen if you tried to take them from me," I reminded her. "Take them? What are you talking about?" She stopped and frowned. No, I'm not talking about the us, John. I'm talking about Carl. Or, more accurately, me and Carl. This is the end. Forever. I told him 3 days ago, and it just took me a while to work up the courage to tell you." "Unacceptable," I said sharply. Even to me, it sounded muffled and powerless. She noticed this and stared at me with a tired smile. "It's too late, because this is really the end, and I am incredibly pleased to say this. Think about what you're doing, Karen. Think about what will happen if you do this." She looked at me carefully, without fear. "You know," she said dreamily, "I was really afraid of you for a long time. You said these terrible things. You knew everything. You knew everything that I thought you couldn't know. You said it so sternly, so seriously. You literally led me by the nose. I truly believed that every threat you made was true. That the only way to survive all this without loss is to submit. For a while, I even believed that I was lucky that you let me stay. I was really sure that this was the only way to save at least something from my life. She knitted her brows, and there was a hint of surprise in her voice. Was I really that blind? Or were you just such a good wizard? Because I swear, I saw an angry dog in front of me, smirking at me, and heard the most horrible sounds I've ever heard in my life. I just reacted to them like a mindless creature, not realizing that I was the one who cornered you. I didn't notice that you were in danger all this time. She wiped the tears from her eyes. I'm sorry I did this to you. I'm sorry for backing you into a corner, leaving only your own anger to defend yourself. You will never know how sorry I am because you would never be so cruel as to do that to another person. You would never do what I did. A bitter smile escaped her lips. To be honest, I don't even know what to feel about the last 6 months or even the whole last year. I know that this feeling is deep shame. But apart from him, all this time seems to be covered in fog for me, and only now am I beginning to see something clearly. She looked at me expectantly, but I didn't say anything. I was like a prison guard watching in horror as the prisoner began to realize that she always had all the necessary means to escape, and I was scared. She continued, "Do you know what's the strangest thing? It's just ended. That's it, in one moment." I looked at him, and everything was gone. I didn't feel anything. I didn't want anything. I just wished it had never existed. He saw that I was looking at him, took it for a manifestation of feelings, and tried to take my hand. His touch. She rubbed her hands together as if she was trying to erase the sensation. I was disgusted. I got sick physically, from him, and from herself. Bitter laughter escaped her throat again. He did not take it very well when I told him the truth. She rolled up her sleeve, showing me the remains of a bruise wrapped around her arm. I don't think this will surprise you, and I don't understand why I was surprised. I ruined my life for a man who is not ashamed to use force against me. She looked at me carefully, but I didn't answer a word. Honestly, you may have known about his nature all along, John. Maybe that's why you pushed me to go down this path. She studied my face, waiting for at least some sign, but I was silent. Anyway, she sighed, rolling her sleeve back, I was such a fool. I remain such a fool. She swallowed, and I noticed a tear slowly roll down her cheek. So, now it's time to understand who you are, John. Are you the one who gives up when the struggle gets too hard? Or are you the one who continues to sit at the table even after his latest bluff has been called? She froze, gasping for breath. I'll tell you honestly, John, I would really like you to be the one who stays. I just. She shook her head again, trying to suppress her sobs. I just regret that I didn't understand this earlier. She got up, got ready, and headed towards the door, but when she reached the threshold, she stopped, looked back, and said, "And you really need to eat more, John. For your own health. You are skin and bones." I looked away, and she left. For a long time, I just sat in the darkened room while the shadows slowly covered the entire space, not knowing what to think or what to do. Closer to midnight, I finally got up and rubbed my eyes. "I'm not hungry," I said to no one in particular. November passed like a disease. Protracted and exhausting, it distorted the flow of time and, having left us even more exhausted and weakened than before. Karen was now constantly at home. She still claimed that the affair was over. I might wish it weren't true if I weren't so busy praying it was true. She was attentive and caring, but she remained detached. I saw that there were many processes going on inside her, but she shared almost nothing. She gave me the impression of a widow or a person who was just beginning to realize how much she disliked herself. In any case, she was silent. We both continued to play family when the girls were around, but other than that, we didn't talk much. December was no better, and soon I began to hope that she would come out of this state. Why? I don't even know, but I probably started to worry that it might affect the girls. That is, until a week before Christmas, she asked me to stay late to talk. There was concern in her eyes, and probably it was passed on to me because I felt something similar inside myself. We sat down at the kitchen table with glasses of wine in front of us, and she stared at her glass for a long time before finally looking up at me. "I don't know what to do, and I need your help," she said with a hint of despair in her voice. "With what?" "With us. With you. With me, first of all, probably." She reached for the glass, but her hands were trembling, and she carefully put it back. I keep looking for a way to help you heal or somehow atone for all the harm I have done, but I can't find anything. I know, I know I've messed it up, and I know you don't owe me anything. But I ask only one thing to give me a chance to somehow atone for my guilt, so that everything that will happen next will make it at least a little easier for all of us. "I don't understand what you're asking of me," I admitted slowly. "You understand everything," she insisted, "and I know that you understand. Just let me know where we are, John. Let me know who we are. You don't have to do anything else. You don't have to make promises. But just give me a little of this. Please. It's not as easy as you think, honey. In fact, you are heading down a very dark path." I leaned back in my chair and drained my glass of wine in one gulp. "You won't like this," I warned her quietly. "I didn't ask to like it." "Good answer. Okay, who am I to argue with you?" I studied her for a moment, gauging the determination in her eyes. "Let's see how long it lasts." "You are nothing to me," I said bluntly. "That's who you are. Nothing." The determination remained. "Explain." "What is there to explain?" I spread my hands. "I don't even know who this person sitting opposite me is, to be honest. This is a strange woman, unknown to me. Oh, I think she has my wife's name, or what she used to call herself. But if there's one thing I'm sure of, it's that you're not her. My wife had a small, round belly and felt comfortable with it. You don't have it. You are not her. My wife had long, beautiful hair that fell over her shoulders and framed a smile that she knew I adored and was special to me. You don't have it. You are not her. My wife drove a minivan. Yours drove an SUV. My wife puts family first. You put yourself first. And I'm sorry that I know so much about your love life, but I see very clear evidence of what you like to do in bed, or somewhere else, something that my wife had never even tried, and I certainly wasn't going to try. So you, no, she." I leaned forward. "Do you understand what I'm talking about? You're not my wife. You are not her. You are not my wife." I took a deep breath, trying to calm down. "My wife was a wonderful person. I can't even describe it in words you would understand. In a world full of women, she was the one. In a life full of questions, she was the answer. And I don't know if you'll ever understand how much I miss her." At the end, my voice shook, and I turned away. She seemed to shrink a little in her seat, but the determination still remained on her face. She seemed prepared for this conversation to be difficult. "I understand what you are saying, John." Or, she looked away, noticing my warning expression. "I understand what that means, but honestly, hair and figure are just looks. A car is just a car. These are minor changes. You can't seriously say that you'd rather see me a little plump then." She wasn't full. Don't even dare. She looked at me patiently. "A little plumper," she repeated, "than this one. I'm in the best shape I've ever been. Women compliment me all the time. I gained self-confidence that I had never had before. I'm happy that I look like this. Is this bad? Of course. Fine. Then just stay like this, and these women can take you for themselves. I don't mind. What worries me? And my hair," she raised her hand, ignoring my attack, and shook her bangs. "It's just hair, John, and I know you loved it when it was long, but it was so hard to care for. Also, this is what women do in their 30s. They make short hair, more mature hairstyles, and you can't tell me you don't think it's cute." I burst out laughing. "You think you can argue with my feelings? Do you really believe this? Do you think if you just explain to me why I should love the hairstyle your lover chose for you, it will suddenly happen by itself? Is this how feelings work? I just want to say that I'm sorry that my motivation was personal desires. And no, by the way, he didn't choose this hairstyle for me. But this does not mean that the changes are bad. They do not depend on my mistakes. I was just a little too lazy to take care of myself, and I needed to start thinking about my hair and body as an adult, like a woman over 30 who needs to take care of herself and think about what she will look like in the future. Heck, I changed my diet and started working out and looking for hairstyles a few weeks before I started the affair. You can't seriously blame my haircut for. This does not make them independent of each other. Do you really believe that it's a coincidence that you suddenly wanted to completely rethink yourself before taking on someone else? Or that you cut your hair short right after Carl told you he liked short hair on women? This does not mean that all the changes are connected with him. I waved my hand in surrender. You're still doing it, I remarked. A sigh of irritation and a bitter, what exactly? Trying to change my feelings with arguments and beliefs. This won't happen. There is no need for this. You do understand this, right? As much as I miss my wife, I have to tell you, I'm actually glad you're not her. Glad that the memories of the man sitting in front of me are completely separate from the memories of the woman I loved. It made a lot of things easier for me. Well, I don't want to go back to being that average woman with the obnoxious clothing size and the messy hair. Don't become like that. If you think so little of her, don't ever be her again. Why did you even decide that I was suggesting you do this? Besides, I don't know who inspired you that you used to look exactly like this, but you were. I stopped and involuntarily grinned. Now you have forced me to argue with my feelings. Just forget about it, okay, Karen? Forget. She glared at me for a moment, then relaxed and tapped her finger on her glass of wine. What if I ask you another question? It would be better not to. I'm listening. If you could, she took a deep breath. If you could answer this question without sarcasm, without bitterness, and without ridicule, I would be very grateful to you. But if you have to answer that way, I think I'll understand. Interesting. Ask. If you were in my place. She looked at me as if expecting me to interrupt her at this point with ridicule, but I just waited silently. If you were in my place and failed, fallen as low as I fell, and tried to make things right, what would you do? Where would you start? Nothing can be fixed. Please, John, words are one thing, but you understand what I'm asking. I understood and thought for a minute. I would leave. I would leave and give everyone around me enough time to start recovering without me. If it had taken forever, I probably would never have returned. No, you wouldn't leave. You will not leave your family. By no means. You're right, I wouldn't leave. But it was worth a try. I'll probably do my best to get back to who I was before. That person, those beliefs and dreams that would not allow me to be so selfish for so long. I would give up anything that wasn't part of who I was, and I would probably pray that the shame of these actions would serve as some kind of lesson to me. Something like that. I took a deep breath. And I think having an affair is a selfish thing, so I'm going to do my best not to do anything selfish for a very long time. I'd try. I do not know. Burn this desire in me. She fell silent for a minute, digesting my words. That's a lot to think about. And I was hurting a person I was having an affair with. Even if he didn't deserve it, or if I thought he didn't deserve it, I would have to hurt him a lot. She shuddered, not happy about this. Why? I thought about it. Well, probably because for a while he was more important to me than you. At some point, I voluntarily made him happy at your expense. At your eternal expense. And if at that moment his happiness was more important to me than your feelings, than your life, I would have to show that now he does not matter to me. I'd have to take it to the extreme opposite to show you. I don't know what. I don't know what that would show. But I would do it. I will do it and never look back. She looked at me with wide eyes and parted lips. I believe you would, she said quietly. We sat in silence for a while. There's one more thing, John. If you're going to tell me you're pregnant. Oh my God, no, She saw my mocking smile. Very funny. No, it's not funny. But I was still smiling, remembering the horror on her face. She paused to collect her thoughts and continued. I don't know how best to say this, but Her eyes sparkled nervously as she glanced at my face and immediately looked away. I understand that it's been a long time since you've had sex, and we're done here. I got up and left the room. In her defense, she didn't run after me or call me, and she did the right thing otherwise. It would have ended even worse. Dad? Yes, dear? Can I ask you a question? We just got back from a movie on Friday, and I was surprised at how tired I was. I was looking forward to putting the girls to bed and finally falling asleep myself. Come on, sweetie, I said tiredly. In the movie, right? Yes. Dad saved his family there because he was strong, right? I took off my shoes. Of course, dear. Why aren't you so strong? I froze and closed my eyes. That's the question. Quite strong, expensive. No, you're not strong, she insisted. You're thin. Without hesitation, I turned to look at Karen. Her expression was somewhere between pity and "I told you so." Thank you for your support, damn you. I turned my back on them. I'm stronger than you think, I said into the void. I am stronger than all of you. But you're really skinny, added a second little voice behind me. I don't know how she arranged it, but everyone was there. I returned home after work and found a house full of people. Everyone in our social circle, everyone I used to see or hope to see at Bailey's parties, was all there. Even some of those who rarely appeared at such gatherings sat here and there, sipping drinks and laughing. There were people I didn't want to see, but didn't notice at first. In fact, as soon as I entered the house, Karen jumped up and started loudly calling everyone into the living room. I need everyone in the living room, she announced. I have an important announcement, and I need everyone to hear it. She met my gaze with a frozen question, but immediately turned away, gesturing for people to come into the living room. I walked around the corner, nervously curious, and felt my blood pressure rise. There, in the corner of the room, stood Carl. She invited him to my house. That damn bitch brought him to my house. After everything she's been saying for the past few months. After he hurt her, she brought him to where our children live. Before I could react, Karen spoke to the crowd. I have something to tell you, she announced, and it won't be easy for me, so I ask you all for a little patience. She glanced at me, and who knows what she saw, but then she took a deep breath and continued. I need everyone here to know what my husband has done for his family over the last year. I did something very selfish, something terrible, and he answered, giving his last strength to take care of someone other than himself. He dedicated himself to protecting our children, and I owe him for that more than I can express in words. Some in the crowd glanced at me, not knowing where this was going. I didn't know either. Was she really going to do this? The secret didn't last long. I had an affair. This statement sounded like a bomb, and the air disappeared from the room. Suddenly, no one was looking at me anymore. There was nothing wrong with my marriage, and there was nothing wrong with my husband or my life. I just allowed himself to get bogged down in something he shouldn't have gotten involved in. Moreover, I deceived all of you in this process. Carl was looking around now, visibly nervous. All his friends will have to find out how safe it is to be near him. Our eyes met, and he seemed to have the audacity to look almost pleading. Now you are on your own. Welcome to the club. I had an affair, Karen continued, and I stole time from my husband and children to be with another man. I risked everything I had for nothing. I didn't even try to stop it. I felt that this is what life owes to me. And to make matters worse, the person who seduced me, distracting me from those whose lives I was supposed to protect, is none other than my husband's so-called friend, Carl Jensen. Signs were heard in the room, and then muffled whispers. He stalked me, he seduced me, and I let him. Moreover, I wanted it myself. I encouraged him. People began to look at each other, finding Carl with their eyes and whispering with their spouses. He suddenly became very interested in finding his shoes. Some of you may have complimented me on the changes in my appearance over the past year. So, these changes became possible partly thanks to my novel. They were my way of distancing myself from the woman I was and the people I loved. She spread her arms, revealing herself. It's not so nice to see them from this side, is it? Some of you may remember how at one of the summer parties my husband began to feel ill, although he did not drink much. It was because he found out that Carl and I were using all of you to play a little game, to test how much we could act like a couple in front of you while continuing to mislead you. We were selfish, stupid, and cruel, and some of you may not want to remain my friends after this, but I hope that you will remain close to John. He fights for his family, for the happiness of his daughters, and it destroys him. You all saw it. It's unlikely that anyone didn't notice how thin he had become or how quiet he had become. He lost everything, and instead of dwelling on it, he does everything he can to make sure others don't lose like he did. She looked at me again, smiled tiredly, and continued. You also need to know that Carl was very skillful and persistent in his seduction. I won't pretend that it was difficult to win me over, but without going into details, I promise you that it was a determined, almost professional attempt. I am telling you this as a warning so that you will be more careful than I was. She looked around the room like a teacher waiting for questions, and then said, I'm sorry for luring you here under false pretenses. I'm sorry I abused your trust in me in the past. I understand that now it seems like the party is over, but I ask you to stay, drink, talk, have fun. Gossip about me, ask John how he's feeling, let your kids play downstairs. I'll leave so I won't bother you anymore. Moreover, she pursed her lips, it's time for me to go to my mother and tell her what I've been doing all these months. She came up to me and extended her arms for a hug. I hugged her for a second and then stepped back. You didn't have to do that. There's no need for that. But she looked like death, barely warming herself as she turned to leave. I looked after her and then turned around and was greeted by a sea of faces staring at me. I feigned a half smile and shrugged my shoulders. Is anyone in this house going to offer me a drink? What else could be said? There was awkward laughter, but the rest of the evening was spent quite well. Carl did not stay. You could have warned me, I told her. At least give me a chance to stop you if I don't want it to happen. On the contrary, I was even a little amused. Maybe it even made me happy. She nodded anyway. I was afraid that something would go wrong, that people will start calling and canceling, or that I'll chicken out at the last minute. And then this would be another way in which you would realize that I failed you. And I guess... A faint smile flashed across her face. I was also afraid that you would try to dissuade me, that you wouldn't want me to humiliate myself like that. But it was necessary. I couldn't help but laugh. You killed a bunch of birds with one stone, huh? I didn't kill anyone. I just scared the flock. She scooped up some oatmeal with a spoon, tasted it, and blew on the spoon. You know, not everyone will turn their backs on him. At least not right away. It will be a scandal, then everything will calm down, and that will be the end of it. But they will no longer feel as comfortable with him as before, or invite him to their place as freely. Over time, they will call less often without realizing it, and then they will find reasons not to invite him to their meetings. They will just gradually push him out, and perhaps they won't even notice how it happened. She tried the oatmeal again. Or maybe it would have been like that if they had had the chance. One thing I know for sure is that Carl is a master at avoiding conflict. I don't think he'll ever give them a chance to push him away. I nodded. Agree. He will pretend that everything is fine, but a few weeks will pass and people will begin to notice that he no longer calls or answers. He'll just disappear. At heart, he is a coward, a whiny weakling, if anything, and you've deprived him of all his friends. I'm surprised he hasn't been cutting off our phones in the morning. He would call me to reduce the likelihood that you would answer, but he won't do that either, because that would mean admitting that I hurt him. Now he's in face-saving mode, which means no contact. I nodded. Bye. For several minutes we sat in silence, none of us ate. Tell me, I said, how did you know that I wouldn't get angry? Or won't I feel humiliated? I mean, you literally made me look like a cuckold in front of everyone we knew. How did you know I wouldn't be mad at you? The same faint half-smile flashed across her face, but this time there was sadness in her eyes. I had no doubt how you would react to my little statement. You're too old to worry about trifles like other people's opinions, and you don't have to worry about it because you always react in a balanced and calm way. You always show that you care about the people around you. So I knew you weren't going to get angry, and I knew people would react the way they did. They respect you. They love you. And so I knew they would want to be there for you. Memories of yesterday's support made me smile again. They are truly wonderful people. No, it's you, John. Her face became hard and full of self-loathing. It's a pity that I forgot this. It's a pity that I stopped seeing everything that makes you wonderful and began to see you as predictable, boring, or... She shrugged. Probably this is not entirely true. I never stopped seeing you as a great person. I just began to see myself as something more. I thought I was special. Without realizing it, I thought I was smarter and more worthy than other people around me. She looked down at the oatmeal. And I was such a fool. On this we agree. And now it will probably cost you your friends too. Well, anyway, thanks for yesterday, I smiled. Stupid, it was nice. Then it would have been worth it. I took a sip of coffee. It's nice when we can agree on something. A week passed, and another surprise awaited me. I pulled into the garage on Wednesday after work, and in place of the almost new SUV was an old sedan. I stood for several minutes, looking at the obvious signs of his age and looking into the windows. There were some of Karen's things on the stand. I went inside. Did something happen to the car? I asked, surprised. Oh, she said, I just thought I needed something different. Something more mine, you know. She was intently washing the dishes. You know, it's funny. When I bought this big SUV, I was delighted. I thought this was exactly what I needed. It seemed like he was perfect for me. And now I understand that I don't like him at all. It's uncomfortable. On the highway, you feel like you're in a boat, and the gas it consumes is simply terrible. People change their minds. This is fine. She dropped the lid of the pan into the water, causing a splash. I can't even understand what I liked so much about him in the first place. He just makes me miserable. So I decided to go with something different. Something that would be more like me. The problem was that we now have so little money. With the money I got for the SUV, I had to cover the cost of the car, taxes, and some other things. So I had to lower my expectations. She washed the lid and began to drain the water. The hardest thing is that I want our old family minivan back more than anything. She dipped her hands into the water again. But that's also good. Now, when we go somewhere as a family, we take your minivan. So I don't need a car for more than just getting around. I studied it for a few seconds. That makes sense, I said, about to say something else, but unable to find the right words. She turned to me. There were dark circles under her eyes, and there was no expectation or demand in her gaze. I went back to the bedroom to change clothes and find my book. Sometimes when you both know the same thing, it's okay if neither of you says it out loud. So this is where we find ourselves. We got along well for quite some time, and after Karen broke up with Carl, she devoted herself entirely to her family. She managed the perfect balance. Her presence was always felt, but she never crossed the line and did not become intrusive. A few weeks passed after the party, and I noticed that I no longer felt internally irritated every time she entered the room. I won't pretend that I didn't get any satisfaction from looking at the dark circles under her eyes or the blank stare that appeared when she was deep in thought. But he did not contribute to this either. From the outside, our cooperation might seem like a positive sign, a manifestation of unity for a common goal. We were, after all, behaving like friendly colleagues united by an important project. Isn't that what I might want? The obvious answer is no. The problem was that Karen didn't want to be just a nice colleague. Her interests went much further, and she was not going to give them up. Now that she no longer had any other emotional and physical outlet, she restrained herself as best she could, but still, every day it became more difficult for her to hide her need. Her restraint began to crack at the seams, and I waited for the moment when all her appearance of calm would completely collapse. Warning signs within the first weekend after the party. She began a small but persistent campaign, filled with subtle touches. She would take my hand while asking a question, then quickly touch my shoulder to say good morning, or even hug me in front of her daughters, knowing that in their presence I would not be able to pull away. I still tried to keep my distance, and every time I noticed that she was reaching out to me, I tried to move away. But over time, these touches of hers began to achieve their goal. They began to seem terribly, terribly normal. I should have made more effort to avoid them or just openly asked her to stop. But underneath all this, there was a big problem. I really liked this physical interaction, even if it got on my nerves and turned everything upside down inside. On the other hand, I felt incredibly lonely, even that small and simple moment. Her fingers squeezing my shoulder and saying good morning was perhaps the most human experienced in a long time. And no matter how much I tried to move away from her, inside me there was a desire to feel at least one more touch that would remind me that I was still human. Perhaps if I had some way out, something that allowed me to take into account my needs in advance, I would easily avoid it. But the whole experience was more like being shot in the chest and trying to leave one last message for your children before the blood stopped flowing. You are in a fog of shock, all your rapidly dwindling energy focused on the one task that is worth doing. Everything else fades into the background, no matter what. However, this is probably just an excuse, but that's exactly how I felt then. I completely stopped caring about myself because I was just a ghost, a phantom to me. Now, coming back to reality, I was completely unprepared for what awaited me here. And her fleeting touches. The slight movement of her finger along my arm when she asked if the girls liked the movie reminded me that life is not just mechanical breathing, not just waiting for the day when this breathing will stop. This is perhaps the essence of what cheating does to you. If I reconsider these words now, they seem exaggerated or overly dramatic. But if you remember how I felt then, they do not convey even a grain of reality. These are flat sketches of what was actually deep and diverse. I just couldn't bring myself to tell her no. This realization scared me because it threatened my future. I certainly wasn't falling in love with Karen again. She was no longer someone I could love, and I still didn't have any sexual desires. But I was aware that her actions, no matter how small, were gradually eroding my much-needed isolation and self-control. I knew this had to stop. I knew it had to end. But now her nail is gently scratching my neck. And couldn't I really wait a couple more days before asking her to stop? I kept putting off this conversation. This was a weakness on my part. I am aware of this. Then two events happened that became harbingers of a more serious confrontation. Karen began to react a little harsher to me and then began to wear revealing outfits at home. There are things that cannot be expressed in words, things that become clear only because you have known a person for a long time, seeing the slightest changes in his behavior. From the outside, this slight change in her mood could have raised 1,000 questions, but I had only one simple and completely obvious explanation, and it was the last thing I wanted to deal with. My wife wanted intimacy. Every day her persistence grew. Her single touches began to be repeated more often. Short touches began to drag on. If I pulled away, she would just smile to herself, as if she knew something, and try again later. Perhaps she believed that if she could establish close enough physical contact, I would eventually break down and give in. But the problem is that I was very far from such a turn, and her own disappointment was growing faster than my walls were crumbling. It was obvious where this was going to lead, and yet when it finally happened, it took us both by surprise. It was evening. The children went to bed. She again reached out to me as if by accident, but clearly with certain intentions. She was wearing a t-shirt and tight panties. When I pulled away for the 1,000th time, she frowned and exploded. "Damn it, John, I'm trying. Can't you at least let me massage your shoulders a little?" "Oh, of course. What could be more harmless than to come up and start massaging your shoulders in your underwear? Of course, later you will understand that I have a lot of tension in my shoulders, right? and you will have to lean on them harder while your hips press against my back. I snorted. How could I not have guessed? It's so innocent. You don't have to be so sarcastic. She sat down on the chair opposite, crossing her arms over her chest. Yeah, okay, I'm trying to seduce you, and we both know it. And what's wrong with that? I want love with my own husband. Yes, what kind of monster will I become? Her face softened, and there was a pleading look in her eyes. I'm human, John. I also have my own needs. And you have them too. Don't ignore them. I mean, it's been so long for you. Don't say it doesn't bother you. You must be tired of doing this. She fell silent. Something in my facial expression told her too much. Oh, she whispered, covering her mouth with her hand. You must be joking. She took a deep breath. You don't even do that. You don't do this at all. John, you need to see a psychologist or someone. This is not normal. No, I jumped up. No, damn it. I'm not going to sit here and be lectured about sex by that damn bitch Carl. I won't let you make me feel guilty or ashamed for not wanting anything from the body that belonged to that scumbag, the haircut you gave him, and the new skills he taught you, so you can. I silenced myself and raised my hands in a conciliatory gesture. I appreciate everything you did to make this easier for me, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. I see that you want to fix everything. I see it. But there comes a time when fixing it is simply impossible. Sometimes you treat cancer and everything gets better. But sometimes the only thing left is to do everything to make the person comfortable. You made me comfortable. For that I am grateful. But now it's time to let it go. She crossed her arms, not about to give up. You know, sometimes people stay in bed even after cancer is defeated. They're afraid, John. They are afraid to get out of bed. They are afraid to return to life as if it has a future again. And then they just need to give them a kick in the ass so that they can finally start living. This made me angry, and in a fit of anger, I blurted out, "You are a very vile person, Karen. Do you know this?" I examined her from head to toe. "You were a beautiful woman. You had a beautiful family and a beautiful life, and you gave it all up to become Carl's skinny prostitute. So do us all a favor and go to hell." I left before she could respond. For the next few days, she was as cold as ice towards me, and all her little touches disappeared like water in the sun. In fact, she almost stopped talking to me and did everything she could to avoid being in the same room as me. I couldn't tell if she was angry, giving up, or just offended. Her expression remained unreadable. What surprised me was that I felt somewhat disappointed. I liked all these weeks of peaceful cooperation, the feeling that we were working together. Even unwanted touches provided a feeling of security and stability that, oddly enough, I appreciated. Because as long as she was trying to get back to me, I didn't have to worry about the future. I wasn't afraid that she would give up, return to Carl, or simply get tired and demand a divorce. I didn't have to fear unexpected problems or intense conflicts. I just liked to think that we were on the same side, even if there was no romantic overtones to it. Now I was suspended again, and I was at a loss to guess what was on her mind. I could only wait for the next step and went through various scenarios in my head. I spent days thinking through every detail. What would a divorce look like financially? How often will I be able to see the children? Will she marry again? Will this man be a father to the girls? What kind of father? Old fears began to return. This thought ate at me, that the girls would grow up with a new dad, and I would miss important moments in their lives, learning about them after the fact and too late to give any advice or support. This was the last step in the abyss of loneliness, the last breath of the life I once had. It was difficult for me to stay in one place for more than a few seconds. I walked back and forth until my foot was bruised. I began to spend more time with the children, trying to participate in their games and leisure activities. I didn't know how much longer I'd have this opportunity, and I wanted to soak up as many of these moments as possible before it was too late. And then, one morning, I entered the kitchen and found breakfast already prepared. A huge, massive breakfast served in absurdly large portions. Karen was already sitting at the table in front of a similar portion. This abundance of pancakes, eggs, hash browns, and sausages seemed especially ridiculous in front of this fragile, fit woman. "It seems you overdid it," I remarked dryly, sitting down at the table. Karen just shrugged. "I'll eat my portion if you eat yours. You won't be able to cope with this, even if you eat all day." "I bet I can do a better job than you," she said, smiling slyly. I tapped the plate with my fork, looked at the mountain of food, and then turned my gaze to her smile. "What is this, Karen? Is this some kind of hint?" "No, not a hint. This is a challenge. This," she pointed to the food, "is what we will work on together." Then she simply picked up her fork, her smile widening. "Let's get fat, honey. Together." And with these words, she put the food in her mouth. I looked at the food again. "What if I'm not hungry?" "MPH, it's okay," she said with her mouth full. "I don't really either." "Yes, okay, I admit it." I laughed looking at this. "And he even ate his breakfast." What of this? Summer was approaching when something happened that I did not expect at all. Maybe it's because she gained a little weight during those months of big breakfasts, or maybe it's because I myself have gained weight again. Maybe it was the calmness or her new haircut. She gave herself a bob, which, to be honest, didn't suit her at all, but she planned to try different options as her hair grew out. Perhaps the reason was the season itself. Maybe the call of spring is to blame, or some. No, these are all excuses. I just got really drunk. I drank myself into oblivion and slept with my wife. It's funny, but time is the main character in this whole story. I'm ashamed to admit, but I didn't even bother to mention it, introduce it, tell what it did and how it influenced us. I didn't give him flowers or say goodnight. But it is time that seems to have decided everything in my life up to this point, and will probably continue to do so in the future. Hatred, anger, fear, love, passion. All these are just subjects of the great king of time, and he disposes of them as he pleases. If I ever need to write a sequel, this is where I'll start. You know how in stories the characters come out of a marriage without sex and go crazy trying to hook up with everyone they can. But the truth is that even a complete lack of sex life is also a kind of sex life, and your body reacts to it. This is where time comes into play. Over time, your body gets used to being away, and even thinking about sex becomes difficult. I hardly thought about it for a long time. But that evening Karen looked and sounded like Karen. Like my Karen, my long-lost wife, not the woman who had done all these things. It was amazing how big the difference was. And it was a good evening. We spent it among friends. I drank more than usual, laughed a little louder than usual, and we danced again. Well, you understand how it happens. You may be thinking that this is the moment when everything was supposed to fall into place. Oh, you nod to yourself. This is the moment when all is forgiven, and I am encouraged to believe in a happy ending. But no. Despite everything Karen has gone through, suffered, and grown in that year, there are some things that will never come back. Periodically, flashes of anger or pain would surface and appear out of nowhere, clouding all my thoughts. They were absolutely terrifying. There was some important piece of the puzzle missing, something that had once been us, and it could never be restored. And to be honest, I was no longer myself. I changed because of her betrayal, just as she herself once changed. This took me years to understand. What has changed? Oh, I think I've gotten quieter. I was less emotionally involved in the world around me, with the exception of girls. I don't think I've ever trusted anyone the way I once trusted the mother of my children. I couldn't be that person anymore. I hated my gullibility for allowing this to happen. So a certain sense of isolation lives within me, despite any choices. But he's manageable, and I'm able to deceive him enough that it doesn't interfere with my decision-making. If you have enough strength, anything is possible. Over the next 6 months after that first drunken night, Karen and I slept together several more times. I don't know what better way to call it. It wasn't wild, it wasn't passionate, and it didn't communicate anything beyond the simplest of movements. I didn't feel that it meant anything, that we were expressing something with this. She seemed to accept it, but with each passing month her face grew older as she waited for me to come back. Eventually, I think she realized she was waiting in vain. That was the day I returned home and found her with a bottle of wine and a manila envelope. "This is an apartment," she said as if addressing no one. Her eyes were empty and she looked straight ahead. I studied her sitting there, trying to remain calm as she completed the final chapter of our story together. One way or another, I knew that I was witnessing a historical moment. I think I was impressed by her composure. I looked at the envelope. "Is this for me?" She shook her head. "For me." I nodded. I didn't ask why. All the time she wasn't around. All these events that happened without her participation strengthened something between me and the girls that she never managed to gain. Oh, she tried. But a certain dynamic had already formed, and all she could do was watch it from the side. So she kept her promise. She put girls first. "You don't have to do this," I suggested, not knowing if I really meant it. "Yes, I have to. Everything works quite well here. It's been a long time, John. Enough so that we can do everything right, and the girls are fine." She tapped her finger on the glass of wine. "None of us really lives. Soon the girls will be old enough to understand what this means and will begin to wonder what it says about us." She finished the wine in one gulp. "Don't you want to show them what it means for an adult to be happy?" I thought about her words. I want them to be happy. But maybe you're right, and this is the next step to ensuring that. I sighed. "Can we afford it?" She just nodded, her face expressionless, but the corners of her lips drooped. "It will be hard, but I can work harder." "You are already working more." Another nod. I sat down opposite. "And the girls? They should stay with you. I would like to come to them in the evenings, to be with them, if possible." "I won't disturb you." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "But if you try to keep me from seeing them, I will kill you." I smiled, wider than I thought I was capable of, and put my hand on hers. "I'm so glad you're back," I said. That's it. I was never sure that I made the right decision in those first months after I found out about my wife's infidelity. My logic was flawed, and any child psychologist would have said that I was making a mistake by staying with her. Some people probably doubt that so much pain can be hidden. I don't know what to answer them except to offer to look at the sincere smiles of two happy children. Even in the most difficult months, every second spent with my girls was a pain-free second. They were the balm I needed most. I don't pretend I was thinking clearly at the time, but I can't say I would have acted differently if I had to go through it again. I'm probably a little biased in my story, and for that I apologize. It's easier for me to admit things that I don't regret, so that's what I'm describing. I don't regret putting my pain second to my responsibilities as a parent, so it comes easy to me. I do not regret that I took a risk, hoping to protect my children from disaster, and therefore these words also come easily to paper. On the other hand, it's hard for me, as someone who cares about morality, to look back and analyze what role I played in what happened to Carl. But even this, but I didn't tell you about this, did I? Like I said, admitting you have regrets is a lot harder. Today, I feel that the world is a cup full of suffering. It makes me sad when I remember how I helped fill it, even in those moments when it seemed justified. In any case, years later, when the girls were already high school students, they presented me with a small but most important trophy of my victory. By then, they had grown up to be beautiful young girls, and every time I looked at them, I felt so proud that it almost hurt. One day, they came home from school talking about a friend who was going through a hard time. You see, her parents were getting divorced. "It's so sad," said my eldest. "Her dad lives in an apartment like her mom, only worse because he lives so far away. Since the summer, she sees him only on weekends. She says that there is so much going on that she forgets to tell him everything. She is afraid that in the end, he will stop understanding her. At least her parents don't fight now," the younger one intervened. "Remember when we were there on the 4th of July and they started yelling at each other? It was terrible." She turned to me, her eyes opened wide and filled with tears. "We missed all the fireworks because we spent the whole night trying to calm poor Elizabeth down so she would stop crying. And her parents were so busy with their quarrels that they didn't even check what was wrong with her." I don't think they even noticed that she heard everything, the eldest explained. They probably thought she was going out and having fun, but in reality she was suffering from what they were doing, but they were too busy with their own showdowns to think about anyone else. The younger one nodded. I'm so glad you and Mom never went through that, Dad. I don't know what we would do. I thought about this for a minute. I can never get so angry that you stop being my first priority, I told them. Not at anyone or for anything. I hope that someday I will be as good a mother as you, Dad, the eldest smiled. I chuckled. Don't worry. There is a special love that a parent feels for a child, and it decides everything. It may sound strange or scary, but it is actually the best thing you will ever learn. You two take up so much space in my heart and guard it so well that I have very little left, but that's enough for me. One day, when you have your own children and they look at you and smile, I think you will understand what I mean. Well, I leaned forward over the table. Would you like to order pizza? Thank all the gods above, they wanted. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.